The October 19, 2022 meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council. We have a form of agenda in front of us. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as published?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. Did you get the maker and the seconder? To approve the agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Do we have anybody here from the public that wishes to address the Transportation Advisory Board on a matter that's of concern to them? Okay. I don't hear anything. I don't see anybody coming forward. So we'll move on to the minutes of the September 21, 2022 meeting. Is there any change or addition to those minutes? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Anderson moves approval. Seconder was
Gotell.
Commissioner Gotell. All right, we got a motion and a second to approve the September 21, 2022 Transportation Advisory Board minutes. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And now we are on to the consent portion of the agenda, and I think it would be helpful for our TAC chair, John Solberg, to just run through those quickly as opposed to just taking them on in a single motion and voting on them without a little bit of backgrounding. So John's going to walk us through those in case anybody has any connections.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So ever so quickly, the first action transmittal in the consent agenda 22-40 is an amendment to the 23 to 26 TIP to add a bridge to the Dakota County, Minnesota River Greenway project. And for information for the group, really what this is the county has a bridge that currently would be funded through their local funds that they would add to what was originally selected trail project. That being said, the question is, well, why would they add a local project to a federal project? The county has submitted for grade separation grant from federal government for that bridge location, and really this is a 23 project, so by adding it to the current federal project, it helps the county be able to deliver that project in time, whereas if they waited until after they were to get a grant, they got that 4-month process to go through the Met Council, could delay their project, and then you have another action to move the project to another year in the TIP. The second project or action transmittal in front of you is 22-41, and that one is for amendment to the 23 to 26 TIP to add the purchase of 2 electric buses and a charging station for Southwest Transit. I want to make sure that folks understand there was a slight error in the way this was written up. The money for this particular project came from MnDOT, a MnDOT grant program for that was called the Clean Transportation Pilot Program. That program was just recently initiated a couple years ago. There's been a lot of difficulties in administering that project over time. So at no fault to Southwest Transit is this being delayed, but that's really the reason why this needs to move a year in the program. And then finally, the last action transmittal in front of you, 22-42, again, an amendment to the 23 to 26 TIP to add the purchase of 8 electric buses for Metro Transit. And again, this one is a new solicitation where Metro Transit was able to receive funds to purchase those buses through the federal low and no emissions vehicle program. Unfortunately, the timing was such that when that was announced and by the time it came to council, it was too late to add into the current TIP. So now it's being amended or would be amended into the TIP as it's passed. And that's the 3 projects in the consent agenda, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions.
Any questions from members with regard to 2022 40, 41, or 42? All right, Commissioner.
Well, just real briefly, Mr. Chair, the need for the bridge is because a rail line would not give us right away, if that sounds familiar to anybody else. So more than doubling the cost of the project and requiring a pedestrian bridge.
When we found out the why in the
Right.
committee, we were well understanding of why you were doing this planning the way you were doing. So congratulations on your foresight. So is there a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved.
Cattell moves. Who's the seconder? Second. Okay. Lewis, Member Lewis. All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, we've got what we call informational items. I would not say that the third one is an informational item, but that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. So get out your Saturday New York Times crossword puzzle in anticipation that we'll go through those first two things, or the mathler, if you do that, when we get to that item on the informational portion of the agenda. But first, we're going to talk about a project that MnDOT and Anoka County are doing together. It's a small business ADA initiative, and we've got
Mr. Chair, I have thank you.
Member
Are we
Foster.
not- Thank you. Are we not doing the agency reports?
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I should back up here. Let's do those reports. I jumped right by them. So do the chair's report. I'm not going to report out on anything from the exec committee other than we had a great conversation around this polling notion. And instead of voting today, we'll be polling today to try to reduce the number of scenarios that we have to deal with in November, where we'll still go through that normal process of potentially amending things and shifting things and then putting that geographic balance lens over it at the end of the period. But a lot of interesting discussion there, and we're going to certainly help or hope that we'll have that same sort of stimulating conversation here on that one, that item number 3 in the informational portion of the agenda. I'm sure we will. So that's it for me, other than noting that Bill Drosty, Mayor of Rosemont, Jeff Weisenell will be the replacement for Member Hanson, who's taking on a new role for Suburban Transit, and then Jeff Weisenell will be coming in from Rosemont to represent Rosemont. So we'll have him with us at the next meeting. And Mayor, thanks for being with us today. Agency reports then, MnDOT, Mike Barnes, Member Barnes.
Mr. Chair, I have nothing to update at this point unless there's questions.
Mayor Winchell, do you want to report out for MnDOT and your experience with them today?
MnDOT is tremendous.
Not what he said earlier.
MnDOT was patching 494 and had 2 lanes closed, and it was, I don't know, hour and 40 minutes to get here, so it was a challenge. But I still love MnDOT. Where are you, John?
He's right behind you. Yeah, he's right behind. Yeah, you better love him. He's right behind you. Member Barnes did tell Mayor Winchell in the exec committee meeting that they have a citizen misery index that they look at every morning and where they can really create trouble for people. And the mayor experienced that today. All right, MPCA, Member Bewin.
Mr. Chair, I didn't have anything for the Pollution Control Agency either.
Okay. I was part of a group on Monday where your organization was there, along with Commerce and some others, on a roundtable with respect to some of the federal funds that are coming down either through the Infrastructure Act or the Inflation Reduction Act and then the CHIPS Act. So got a chance to meet a couple of your colleagues, and that was a good participating roundtable on how the states and the counties and the cities are going to be able to work together to try to advantage Minnesota on some of these grants that will require some kind of a match. So all of us should be thinking about that. And then where do you want to go? I think Mary Liz Holberg will help us devise a legislative strategy on how we get the money to put aside for some of these grant funds or matching funds that we'll need to do some of these projects. Anyway, on to Carl. Member Crimmins is here. Update from the MAC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few things. A couple weeks ago, we were awarded from J.D. Power and Associates the #1 airport in the mega airport category. So that was quite welcome, please. That came when we had ACI North America here for their annual conference. The other thing is, this is as everybody knows, this is MEA week. And tomorrow, we're expecting 40,000 people to go through security. And it's still 15% below the 2019 level, but it's quite 36 to 40,000 passengers are expected to go through security tomorrow for MEA weekend. And we're stressing that if people want to travel, they should try to get on the MAC website and pre-book your parking. It's a reduced price. I think it's like $7 a day cheaper, and then you're guaranteed a spot in the parking ramp. So they recommend that. And on October 5th, Delta opened up their international route to Seoul, South Korea. And from there, in South Korea, the airport goes to 130 different destinations. So it's usually a major place for people to travel in the Orient. And Haneda, which is near Tokyo, really close to Tokyo, that's going to open up with Delta on March of '23. And then the other thing is we had Expo 2027 panelists in town. Funny thing is, America calls it the World's Fair. Every other country calls it an expo. So Expo 2027, they wanted to see the airport to make sure they could handle the additional capacity. And they said there was no problem, that the airport and the panelists agreed there was no problem. They think by the end of this week or early next week, we'll find out if Minnesota is going to be one of the finalists. They have 130 countries trying to win the expo, and they're going to try to whittle it down so it'd be a lot easier voting. And they think by the end of this week, we'll know if Minnesota made it. They went from here, they went to the White House, they went to the State Department building, they had tours, they got assurances from the federal government that they're 100% behind Minnesota's application for this expo. And I got J.D. Power, this and that's about it we have, Mr. Chair.
And with respect to the expo, if the United States is selected, it's coming to Bloomington, Minnesota.
It's going to be right east, due east of the Mall of America.
Yep.
The city of Bloomington purchased that land, I think it's 35 acres, just due east across the street from the Mall of America, and that's where it's going to be. And people were complaining about the buildings like the Olympics, when you build all these buildings and you spend millions and millions of dollars to build buildings. But the mayor of Bloomington has assured us they already have commercial ideas for putting businesses in these buildings once the expo's over. So that commercial space is going to be utilized. It's just not going to sit there and decay. So, and everybody's in charge. Oh, I should mention also light rail. We haven't had any complaints in the recent past. And talking to our police department at the airport, they're working with the Met Council and they're working with the city of Bloomington and Richfield and all these other cities to make sure they have proper security on the light rail. We haven't had any complaints in the recent past. Now, I don't know if there has been some incidents, but we haven't heard from them. So we brought it up at the commission meeting, and the chief of police was there, and he said, as of today, things seem to have smoothed out with extra manning on the rail trains. So that's all I have today, unless there's some questions.
Thank you, Member Crimmins. Did Member Crimmins' report cause anybody to ask Member Crimmins any questions? Any members? All right, thanks for that. And then Deb Barber, Met Council. Member Barber, your report, please.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. A bunch of us came from a great event this morning. It was the groundbreaking for the Gold Line. So Commissioner Medicine, Karwowski, and also Mary Jane Stevens. I know there are several of us. I know my feet haven't completely thawed out yet, but it was a great event. I mean, I think it really shows what we can do when we come together with partnership across different levels of government and different agencies. And just the large support that was out there for the event today was really quite impressive. Another one that's going to be opening is the D-Line. We're going to have an event for the opening of the D-Line on December 3rd, and we will make sure that we get that information out to all of you. So hopefully we won't have quite as cold of a morning, but it still should be a great event. So I'm very excited for that. And then for Metro Transit, I wanted to report on some of our ridership numbers because obviously it's something we talk about a lot. So right now, our monthly ridership reached its highest point in 2.5 years. More than 3.8 million rides were provided in September, the highest monthly total since February 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic began. Ridership increased on all modes every month this year and is up about 15% compared to the same time last year. Through the end of September, nearly 28.7 million rides have been provided. Fall ridership has been boosted in part by the introduction of a universal transit pass. University of Minnesota students can now use their student IDs as transit passes and are tagging 9,000 to 11,000 times each weekday. Ridership among U of M students has doubled on weekends compared to last year. We do have, still have a decrease in our local bus ridership of about 1/3, and light rail is down 1/2. We have a different story for our ABRT lines. This is, to me, quite exciting because I know this group has been very supportive of the ABRT lines, but our BRT ridership has reached our pre-pandemic levels starting in September.
Report out, cause any members to ask Member Barber any questions or further comments? Okay, thank you. And then I'll turn to Member Hanson for Suburban Transit Authority report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, when you skipped over us earlier, I thought maybe you didn't want to hear from me today. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, thanks, Member Foster, she got me back on track.
We were talking about it, but nobody wanted to ask. Happy to report that suburban transit ridership also is increasing. Southwest Transit, Southwest Prime service continues to grow at a record pace. Mall of America and airport service has grown to account for 20% of the overall Southwest Prime ridership. Express service increased by 25%, primarily due to the start of classes at the U of M. Southwest will soon be able to utilize their newly constructed Southwest Station Transit Hub in Eden Prairie, which is expected to be operating in early 2023. Southwest also has begun a study to determine infrastructure improvements and a vehicle replacement plan that are needed as the agency pursues its sustainability goals for electrifying its fleet and using renewable energies to power both its facilities and fleet in the future. Plymouth Metrolink Click and Ride on-demand service is nearly back to pre-pandemic levels. They were awarded $15 million in DOT raise funds for Station 73 Transit and Regional Improvement Project to modernize their transit station, improving safety and mobility to roadways surrounding the station, and improve efficiency of operations by adding some inline bus platforms. MPCA ridership continues to grow. It is up 72% compared to a year ago. And similar to Southwest Prime, MPCA Connect continues to grow at a record pace. A challenge is that MVT is seeing some unmet demand for service and is constrained by vehicle availability. So that'll be something that will need to be addressed in the future. That's my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Member Hanson as a result of that report? All right. One other thing I wanted to mention that Steve Peterson at the exec committee meeting handed me the what's called the Ite Journal, a community of transportation professionals. And one of the projects that we helped fund down in Prior Lake was selected as the winner in the traffic engineering category for 2021. It's a downtown Prior Lake improvement project. Nice. We've got the link, and I think Elaine's going to get it sent out to everybody so they could read the article on this national award-winning project that was done down in Prior Lake, partially with TAB funding. All right, now, get myself into the right spot here. We'll go to the first informational item. As I mentioned, we've got folks from MnDOT with us, Renee Raduenz, I think, and Mindy Heinkel from MnDOT, and a gentleman from Anoka County as well, I think. And if you would introduce yourselves when you come up, we'll talk about, we're eager to hear about the Small Business Initiative partnership that you had with Anoka County, and then I'm going to ask Commissioner Look for his comments after the fact.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and TAB Council members and other guests for having us here today to talk about our unique pilot opportunity with Anoka County. And I'm Renee Raduenz, and I'm the Director of the Advancing Equity Office at MnDOT. I'm joined by Mindy Heinkel, who is our Program Supervisor, and Brandon Olvanes. Jerry was out with COVID at the household, so couldn't make it today, but Brandon worked closely with us during this project. We'll be able to speak to it. So the mission of the Advancing Equity Office at MnDOT is to advance equity through procurement and contracting with small underutilized businesses. So starting in 2020, after you all approved this pilot program with MnDOT, you defederalized the project, our offices started collaborating together to increase small businesses' participation in Anoka County to perform small ADA improvement projects on the county highway system. And so we recently completed a 3-year pilot with Anoka County, and we're here today to give you an update on that, share some of the results from the partnership, what we learned, and discuss next steps. So, advance that. So I'm going to give a quick overview of our MnDOT Small Business Opportunity Program before talking about the pilot with Anoka County, just to give you some background. So MnDOT's Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan and inventory that was completed indicates that roughly 70% of pedestrian infrastructure, ramps, signals, and crosswalks do not meet ADA accessibility standards. So while there were large contractors experienced with MnDOT's construction requirements and specifications prior to piloting this program, just 2 targeted group businesses, or TGBs, which is a state certification program, and DBEs, or the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, which is the federally certified program, had the capacity sufficient to work on these construction projects and work as a prime or a subcontractor, working on ADA construction work. And there were no TGBs or DBEs that were at the capacity sufficient to do ADA improvements. So we developed a pilot program in 2018 called the ADA Small Business Opportunity Program with the goal of growing that pool of small businesses capable of performing the ADA construction work, design and inspection in accordance with MnDOT specifications. So we try to keep our approach as simple as possible. We break down work into smaller contracts under $250,000 called negotiated maintenance contracts, or NMCs for short. It's an alternative contracting method that is based in Minnesota statute that saves time by simplifying the normal competitive bidding process. So the statute allows us to award highway construction and maintenance contracts under $250,000 by simply obtaining at least 2 quotes for that work. We can't limit the competition for NMCs, but they are the #1 delivery method used at MnDOT to create opportunities for local small businesses to quote on prime contracts. And many of the small businesses that we contract with are TGB, DBE certified, but they don't have to be certified to work on these contracts. And then in addition to our NMCs, or the negotiated maintenance contracts, we layer on professional and technical contracts to build capacity among small businesses to perform the ADA design and inspection work. And we use the Equity Select contracting tool to allow us to do that, to contract under $25,000. We can directly select a contractor to work on that. So we're providing opportunities for these small businesses to gain experience working to become more qualified. Hopefully, if they have the goal of being on our pre-qual program, they can do that and then bid on larger contracts in the future. And since we piloted this program in 2018, now we have approximately 20 TGBs and DBEs that are probably qualified to perform as a prime or a subcontractor on ADA construction, and approximately 10 TGBs or DBEs that are capacity to do the ADA inspection. So that's impressive to us over just that period of time. And then at the end of the PowerPoint slide, there's a resource page that shows the statute that allows us to use this contracted method and some of the other acronyms that I've been referring to as well. So as I mentioned, negotiated maintenance contracts are kind of an effective method for MnDOT that we use to get prime contracts into the hands of small businesses. NMCs were the primary method also used in the Anoka County pilot to get, this business into the hands of small businesses to pilot. So at MnDOT, from fiscal year 2019 to 2022, the number of NMCs administered increased 39%, from 109 to 151. And then the dollar value awarded increased a substantial 218%, from approximately $2.6 million spent on these to $8.2 million. And then additionally, the percent of the value of NMCs that were awarded to small businesses or underutilized businesses went from 40% to 70%. So that's 30 percentage points from fiscal 2019 to 22. So we've seen great improvements over the short amount of time that we've piloted this. The average contract amount for an NMC is roughly $60,000. So that's a nice sweet spot under 100, even though we're allowed to go up to 250. When we developed the pilot program in 2018, we did focus on ADA improvements, knowing that there was a significant need. But as we've been on, we're trying to expand the work types for small businesses to work on things like fencing, restriping, building demolition, fiber optic cable improvement or removal and installation. So that's just to name a few, but we are expanding that as we go on. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mindy and Brandon, who are going to just talk a little bit more about talk about, since I didn't talk about it at all, the pilot that we had over the last 3 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Raduenz.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you for having us today.
Yeah, so for this project in particular, it started because Anoka County defederalized 2 different projects, and we had made a commitment of $450,000 to invest in various TGBs, DBEs. And in 2020, we worked with MnDOT State Aid to collaborate on delivery and agreed to 3 construction seasons of small ADA projects and pedestrian ramp repairs in these small valued contracts. The purpose of this effort was to create greater opportunities in the marketplace for small businesses in Anoka County and improve the transportation infrastructure to make it accessible for everyone. And then we used the NMCs in order to simplify the contracting disparities and be able to do what we can to help the disadvantaged and targeted business groups and veteran-owned groups. And then the ultimate goal was to have some Anoka County staff follow along to be able to hopefully replicate some of these contracts in the future. And then the businesses, they would get experience as a prime contractor on a government contract without as much difficulties and in a smaller scale. And then they'd get skills in ADA construction specifically and getting continuous feedback. We were really partners with the contractors on this, and we held 2 virtual information sessions during COVID to help promote the opportunities and get a better understanding of what we were aiming to do here. So in the end, we awarded 14 contracts over the last 3 years. Each contract was basically just a pedestrian ramp pair. There were 3 small businesses that were awarded. 2 were TGB, DBE, and VET certified, and 1 was CERT certified. And then we also had several technical and professional consultants that helped do inspections for it. We worked mostly on CSA 12, 109th Ave, in Blaine between Central Ave and University to bring the sidewalks and trails up to ADA compliance. This area was great. It had nice wide shoulders, so it made traffic control very easy and was a good stepping stone for these contractors. We started with some of the easier ones and then worked up to harder ones as we went. So it was a collaboration project between Anoka, MnDOT, and the contractors. Yeah, we did 3 work orders, 1 per year, through the master partnership contract with MnDOT. And we, in the end, our goal was to meet the $450K that we had agreed to. And 1 new contractor was awarded each year. Yeah. So the heart of this is all about collaboration with the small businesses between Anoka County and our team. We really worked because we wanted to see these contractors succeed in order to have a good product and help build the base to hopefully allow them to feel more confident to bid for other government contracts in the future. We worked with Simmons Contracting, Standard Sidewalk, and JLTs Incorporated, who were all either CERT or DBE, TGB certified, and then 3 other businesses also quoted on these projects, but didn't get awarded. And then as well as all the other consultants who worked on inspection from elsewhere from the Metro, but we were mostly working on trying to build the base within Anoka County in particular.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah.
So as you can see here on the slide before you, These are real comments and feedback, high-level highlights from consultants and contractors of what they felt that the benefits they got from this partnership, from this collaboration. In addition to what you see on this slide, it also tells you a lot about why this collaboration has been so successful. But what you don't see is that small businesses also benefit and learn about, how each government contract can be unique. They learned about things such as terms and conditions, understanding what prevailing wages, Indian employment, special provisions, the importance of scheduling, negotiating, communication with a whole project team other than just their crews, and what that takes and what that means. They learn about other things like audit and compliance, that's not something to be discouraged by, that it's a part of our process and it's something that they don't have to fear. They also learn through hands-on experience to understand the processes and what it takes to understand them on the front end so that they can better position themselves to win government contracts in the future while mitigating risk, increasing their revenue as they move forward in their own journey. They learn that this is also for them. There are opportunities out there for small businesses, that we are all listening, we are trying, and that we care. Next steps.
In the future, now that Anoka County is working to finish our commitment for the $450,000 that we had from defederalizing, we're working on exploring how we can use these NMCs and small business targeted contracts in other ways, specifically with these other different kinds of work that need minimal specialized equipment and that are easy to try to get some contractors involved into government projects on a more manageable scale. We're really interested in noise wall painting, see if we can get some house painters in order to expand that pool and get some work done that way, as well as vegetation control, or herbicide spraying, cleanup. Painting signal systems and lighting replacement is also something we're looking into, but that would involve a little bit more traffic control and would probably be a bit more down the line.
Okay, it's just like due to time and whatever, I just like to share a couple key items that we felt that we learned that are key to successful partnerships, especially when contracting with small businesses. One, as you may have heard earlier on, is keeping those contracting values low, less than $100,000, especially to those with fewer assets or maybe the capabilities that larger companies have when it comes to insurance or bonding. Really being intentional about increasing the likelihood that small businesses compete against other like-sized businesses. Looking for opportunities to unbundle work, whether you're unbundling and extracting them or creating standalone projects with those work types that small businesses are capable to perform. And focus on simple work types where there's relatively high labor content and low capital. And this also helps remove additional barriers. And always try to look for opportunities where you can simplify contracting processes, removing additional barriers or the forms or the documents so that the first time or two that they look at them, it's really easy to understand and they know what's expected of them. I've learned firsthand too that it's really important that you really take the time and go the extra mile to seek out other small businesses, not just the ones in the directories, but those that are in the fields or in the marketplace that have transferable skills. Encourage them to become certified if they meet those requirements, and that takes going the extra mile as well. And really providing that hands-on support, not just in the field, but also behind the scenes. Remaining flexible and open-minded, and taking the time to really pay attention to tracking and analyzing your results, not just for identifying gaps, but the progress as well. And if I learned anything through this adventure and many others, it's not a one and done. And we just need to continue to encourage them to keep moving forward and keep trying and keeping small businesses at the forefront as we're planning and making our business decisions, and really making a conscious effort to try to embed that into our day-to-day work in how we do business every day as we work towards, advancing equity, increasing those contracting pools for the future so that small businesses can compete, maintain, and sustain and be successful, not just in highway heavy, but in the transportation industry in general. I want to thank you all for your time. And as Renee mentioned, on the slide, you'll see a few links to our websites and some of the laws that we operate under and some of the common acronyms that we use through this collaboration and other small business contracting approaches. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Mr. Raduenz, can you come back up? I was just wondering, and maybe the Anoka County folks as well, or Ms. Heinkel, just wondering how this program can be sustained.
With
you said
Anoka
this-
County or with?
Yeah, by county or just through MnDOT. I mean, are you going to have a constant source of funding to work with counties on programs like this? Because it seems tremendously valuable.
It does, yeah. We have Ramsey County in kind of the next layer here, listening in hopefully today, interested in partnering with us as well. Again, they have to kind of bring some of the funding with us, and we can shadow and work with them on the process so they can learn it. Again, we do have a set-aside budget within our program each year, so we plan to sustain and grow. But in terms of our partnerships with counties, we welcome that, and we would love to do that if there's interest. So again, we're in conversations right now with Ramsey County, Brian Isaacson, John O'Phelan, to move forward on seeing if there could be something that works next with them.
All right.
Do you have anything to add, Mindy?
I'm going to, questions for this team first, then I'm going to get Commissioner Look to give his observations on the program. Member Crimmins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was just curious, at the airport, when we let bids out, we require a certain percentage of DBE subcontractors. So instead of doing what you're doing, even if you attract a large contractor, 15% of those subcontractors have to be DBE or TGA. Can't you do that? Is that possible for a state agency to do that?
Yes, there are currently on specific projects within the department that have the TGB, and they set goals on them for like a 6% or 15%. I think that range varies depending on the project or the delivery method being used. But there are some of those special provisions and goals in place on some projects. This is unique, where there's not specific TGB and DBE goals set on it, and that's due to the statute 161.32 that we're, subdivision 2 that we're operating under, that we can't restrict.
Right, and this program allows us to work with those that are not certified and also work as a prime. So a lot of times when they're working on federal projects that are very large, they're always primarily working as subcontractors. So this gives them the prime experience that they want, and it meets, gaps and things that we have at the agency, specifically around ADA, but we can expand. We're looking to expand those work types as well. So I think it's like in addition to those goals, we're adding to that. So we're not replacing it or taking place of it. We work in collaboration with our Civil Rights Office and encourage them to also meet their goals on federally funded projects as well.
Thank you.
Member Foster, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This was great. This is super exciting to see. I have a question about the 70% of Minnesota's pedestrian infrastructure not being ADA compliant. You said there was a study about that?
Yes.
Is there a way that we can see that study?
Yes.
Or where is it, I guess?
Yes, we can. I did follow up with our ADA coordinator at MnDOT. Didn't hear back from her, Christy Billier, and I can follow up with you with that.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Commissioner Look and get his observations on this joint initiative between MnDOT and the county.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to comment, first of all, thanking this body for supporting us in the defederalization of these projects. That's what really started all this. And I remember it was a robust conversation, to kind of think outside the box of what we normally do. But this ultimately allowed us to save money. We were able to support small businesses, as was indicated, and we were able to expand available contractors. Sometimes government, I think, gets accused of not collaborating well together, and that simply was not the case in this scenario. We collaborated very well, and Anoka County was certainly committed to making this work from the very beginning and, making good on our promise that we were going to offset the defederalization. I think what we didn't know when we got into this was that we were going to see an eventual constraint or a reduction in the available contractors that were out there. What I mean by that is we've seen kind of an influx of new monies, whether it's federal or state or wheelage tax or whatever the case is, where counties and cities have had more dollars available to them, and so they initiate more projects, but contractors aren't born every day. There is only so many contractors and there's only so much capacity, and so what we've found is that when a contractor has more bids than they can handle, they start throwing high prices. If that sticks, great, we'll make a lot more money on this deal. And so although there's more revenue, there isn't necessarily more projects getting done efficiently, or what you used to in the past. And so that increase in demand for contractors led to an increase in price, essentially. So you threw more money at it, but you weren't getting as good a pricing. But ultimately, this was a win for ADA in upgrading these areas, these intersections. And it serves a vulnerable population. That's a win. It's a win for small businesses. We're able to support small businesses, and it's a win for the competitive bidding going forward into the future, because there's more businesses now that can compete for this. So overall, I think it was smashing success. And as a pilot, I hope other counties, consider it something that they want to look forward to as well. I think defederalizing is, I heard a number like 20% savings or something. So in situations where it works and where and other counties can take advantage of something like this, I think everyone wins in the process. So.
And has it triggered Anoka County into thinking about how to continue to fund this kind of initiative into the future? And do it year after year?
I don't know that we've had that conversation as of yet, but I think we'll be bringing this up to our transportation committee and definitely evaluating successes, yeah.
All right, good. Thank you. Any other questions for the team or for Commissioner Look? All right, good. Thanks, folks. Thanks for reporting out on this matter. Now we're going to go to what we call the HSIP informational item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Corey Festivog. I'm with MnDOT Metro Traffic, and I'm here to present the proposed project list for the 2022 Highway Safety Improvement Program. One thing that I'll note is that this cycle's list of projects is significantly larger than previous cycles, primarily due to the additional IIJA funds that we received. So there are significantly more projects and a significantly higher dollar amount. I think it's about $63 million in projects for this cycle. That funding roughly broke down to about 22% for MnDOT, 57% for counties, and 21% for cities. Let's see here. We awarded both, the proposed list includes both reactive projects and proactive projects. And that's roughly a 60% proactive and 40% reactive. And I guess pending questions, I can leave it there.
All right. Could you describe some of the types of projects that you were able to fund?
There are numerous roundabout projects. There are projects that include road diets, 4 to 3 lane conversions. There's a significant number of projects involving bump outs and signal improvements in some of the urban areas. There's just a good variety of projects. A lot of them there's a particular scoring part that includes bike and ped, so there are numerous projects that include bike and ped components as well, so.
All right, you might describe for some of our newer members the basic function or purpose of the Highway Safety Improvement Program.
The Highway Safety Improvement Program, the main goal is we're focused on lower cost, higher benefit transportation projects. You know, it primarily, we're looking to improve safety of the roadways. Yeah, in this case, you know, some of it goes to trunk highways, but, you know, it is also open to county and city projects.
When would be the next opportunity for counties and cities to be able to apply for HSIP funds?
The HSIP program is on a 2-year cycle currently. There have been some years in the past where proactive and reactive have gone in year cycles back and forth, but for the last few cycles, it's been both proactive and reactive projects in a 2-year cycle. So the next time that they'll be able to submit projects will probably be around the June timeframe of 2024.
All right, very good. You know, sometime it would be good to have you back from MnDOT and talk a little bit about the safety improvements that you've seen, the data impacts, you know, is there?
Sure.
You know,
And
lower
I
number
do
of
believe-
fatalities or injuries, things
Sure.
of that nature.
And I think there was, previously, I think there have been some before and after studies regarding.
If you've got some that you've prepared, if you could send them to Elaine, I think many of our members would like to see that data.
Okay, I think Elaine, you're aware of that data.
All right, good. Thanks for being with us. Any questions? That trigger any questions? Yes, Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I just want to say that the county really supports this and there's dollars going toward all these great safety projects. So first of all, thank you. You know, as we're looking at going towards 0 deaths, these solicitations are very critical in making a lot of progress on the TZD. And we hope that the level of funding, you know, continues for the future because we think that that's very necessary.
As do we.
I also want to say that, you know, we support all these arterial BRT, but we really would like to see a number of these applications were submitted for funding, you know, with scoped elements, that planned projects. The county staff and the county board would really like to see, though, that the Metropolitan Council fully scope and budget these. And to the particular point of this, I made this at the point at the last meeting too, on these necessary improvements. It's just what we spoke about, the ADA improvements throughout the entire corridor, which is more than just ramps. Sometimes it's also signals and such like that. And we need this to deliver successful projects to meet the needs of the users, because the users need ADA accessible places. And the funding, you know, that would help local cities and everyone is where you want to get to compliance. When you hear a number of 70% of Minnesota's infrastructure is not pedestrian compliant, if we don't start scoping this stuff, fully scoping these projects, we're missing out. We're missing a huge portion of this and some of the work that we could be doing on that. So I just wanted to point that out a second time since it came right back up here in this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good point. All right, thank you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Now we're going to get to the heart of the meeting. We're not going to do any voting today, but we decided as we, at a staff level and the exec committee level, that what would be really helpful as we move towards a November vote and trying to achieve consensus on how to spend these highway trust fund dollars that come down to us through this process called the regional solicitation, that we should be thinking about ways to assist all the technical people that are helping with the evaluations. And so we're going to do some polling questions today. Steve Peterson's going to lead us off on this effort, but we've got an extra $100 million to work with thanks to the IIJA. And as I mentioned in November, we're going to be able to discuss how we want to allocate these funds. Our process is generally one where it's pretty free-flowing, and there may be amendments made. We usually put a geographic lens on everything towards the end of the process in order to achieve what in the past I think has been a pretty remarkable outcome, and practically in all instances I've been involved, consensus on how to spend these highway trust fund dollars that are coming down to the region. I think at the end of the day, when you think about these polling questions, what we're really going to try to figure out is where we're going to put some extra transit money, what we're going to do with this unique project money. There's some options there, and then the carbon reduction money as well. And so I'm going to turn now back to Steve, who's going to lead us through his presentation, and then we'll get into the heart of the conversation and do this polling that we're talking about on 3 or 4 key areas. So, Steve, thank you.
Mr.
Thanks for
Chair.
being with us, and thanks in advance to you and all the staff for all of this intensive work that was done to make our task a little bit easier as we wrestle with all these different concepts. And I'll say at this point in time, let's not get down into the weeds too deep and talk about projects. Let's keep it at a policy level if at all possible, because I think that's the direction that the technical people want. What are the policy implementations that we want to make? And we'll deal with the detail of it in November. So thanks, Steve.
Good, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we're about probably 90% on the way there on these funding lists. If you look across the board, we're pretty close, and the themes that Chair Hovland alluded to before, what to do with some extra transit money, how to approach unique projects, and then the carbon reduction are really the 3 main topics for today. But then next month, let me get to the next month at this committee, you will actually be voting on the action item, and that will be the time if you want to think about geographic balance and other project level changes. That would be the more appropriate time to make motions or amendments on that fact. But we're going to try and keep it at a policy level here today and answer some of those basic questions that we just spoke about. So actually tomorrow, we will bring this as an action item to our Funding and Programming Committee. They won't be narrowing down the list or giving you a recommendation. We're going to have them come up with a list of differences between the options and other technical feedback. So they won't say we like this option or we like that option. They're going to try and create some simplified differences or cheat sheet for you to use to say what's the difference between midpoint and bike ped, et cetera. So we've been quite busy since last time we came before you, and wanted to go through a few of some of the feedback you've given us as well as other committees and what we did to those lists. And maybe to do that, I think the best way is I'm going to escape out of this and actually open up PDF here. And there were extra copies, right, Jenna, of this if people want to get into it. So one thing we heard was clearly delineate where the funding lines would have been before IIJA, the federal funding bill, and after. So you can see on here, we have some thick black lines that show kind of what $200 million approximately would have got you versus now we've got $300 million. We also were asked to kind of clearly identify in different colors the different funding sources, because again, we have 2 new funding sources. One is the on-system bridges. We've shown that now in purple, and so that's on the second page right here. We have about a little over $20 million of bridge money, and that's for bridge rehab and replacement. So we are suggesting that we fund all 5 bridges that were submitted, and that totals about $20 million. Shown in purple. Kind of make my way back to the list. So now we're on transit and travel demand management. And we'll pause here a little bit as we get into the polling questions, but the gray was another color. Down at the bottom, that's in travel demand management. So last cycle, you did set aside a certain amount of money for these projects. They're more near-term in nature. They don't need 4 to 5 years to be developed. And so with the available money you set aside last time, we were able to fund 5 of the 7 projects on that list. You'll be asked today, a question in the polling is, do you want to take additional transit TDM money and fund numbers 6 and 7 on that list? But that's forthcoming here still. Commissioner Ramsey County Commissioner did ask us to note projects that did receive other federal competitive funding sources, so that is shown in the tables here, footnoted in the tables. That's another good tiebreaker thing to think about as you get down to those last funding decisions. And then lastly, carbon reduction. We have a few slides in the PowerPoint on this too, but we brought the tab, and then the next following Monday after that, we brought to our Transportation Committee a set of recommendations and asked you and them, what would you like to do with this new federal funding program called carbon reduction? It has fairly wide federal eligibility. You could use it on bike bed transit or a limited amount of kind of roadways, system management, ITS type projects and roadways. And what we heard from this group as well as from Transportation Committee is let's put it into bike ped. That's where we have a lot of projects that were applied for. And number 2, let's only use 2 years of the funding. So that would be 2023 and 2024, $8 million a year, total $16 million. Let's only put 2 years of money in because the money's available and the years are coming quickly, so you need a little bit of time to develop those projects. But at the same time, MnDOT and all state DOTs are asked to do a carbon reduction strategy within 2 years of IIJA being signed. So by November of next year, 2023, MnDOT, working with its partners, will need to have a carbon reduction strategy. So we've got that effort. The council's doing a multimodal greenhouse gas measures consultant study that is just starting, as well as a few others. So we think the planning will have a chance to catch up, and we can, at that time, have a good discussion on what the best use of those funds are. So the money's still there, about $8 million per year, starting in 25, 26, 27, 28, et cetera. That's still, we still have that money that goes to the MPO, but we're just gonna wait until the state's plan in particular is completed. So with that $16 million, we've proposed to you 2 approaches, and maybe I'll start out with, when you see this next month, you'll see 2 separate action items. Action item number 1, do you want the midpoint funding scenario, which is the blue, or do you want the orange, the bike ped heavy scenario? The midpoint follows those traditional modal midpoints, the modal funding ranges that you put in the application. The bike ped, or the orange, shifts about $16 or $17 million to bicycle pedestrian area. Some of that, about 10 or 11 million, come from roadways, and the remainder, about 5 million, coming from the transit modal area. So those are the 2 kind of base options that we're presenting to you. So you'll tell us either blue or orange, and then make any other kind of small changes to the project list. So that's the first action item. Action item number 2 is, what do you want to do with carbon reduction? So that'll be a separate decision. And once we're down to either blue or orange, then we have kind of 2, I guess, general themes or add-on options that we're gonna, that we've completed or put together so far. One, we're showing as option 1. So if you look at the kind of the first column here and the first column here, in both of the remaining funding scenarios, that is focusing on getting down the multi-use trail list. And again, multi-use trails, those are bigger trail projects. The maximum award is $5.5 million, and you can see you've got a lot of really large projects, and just the money doesn't go as far because the maximum is higher. In option 1, we're putting as much of that money towards the multi-use trail list to go kind of as far as we can down it. So because they're about $4 or $5 million each, you get 3 more projects. So that's option 1. Option 2 would be kind of the second and the fourth column. And that is to focus more on the pedestrian and safe routes to school. Again, the pedestrian maximum award is $2 million, safe routes to school is $1 million. So here you get more projects, and in terms of a number of projects, but not as many big projects. And you don't get to kind of go further down that big 49 application list. So two different approaches, and we can have a a good, healthy debate on what you want to do, and then we'll select one of the two for how you want to spend that final $16 million. Any questions there before we?
Well, Steve, I think that for our benefit, are you thinking that the threshold sort of polling question would be, which of the base options do we want to follow, or is that, where do you want that question in sequence? Because you just talked about it, and it caused me to think about where you wanted that in sequence of asking questions.
So, Mr. Chair, members, we didn't anticipate asking that question today, but more of next month, because and the reason for doing that is because we were going to wait to get all the technical feedback on the differences between the scenarios so that you could have that as an input to your decision.
I think that's a good, that's a good thought. Anybody feel differently about that? Do we hold off on the base option selection until we see the result of our polling activity and advice from the technical people on, if you take the midpoint, which is a traditional route we've always taken, here's what you're going to see for the different funding scenarios, or the bike ped heavy. So I think that's good. So we're going to really concentrate on those other questions that you've raised. And I think the first one was, you've got, is that deals with keep the BRT rule in place or break the BRT rule?
Yes, so let me get to it in the slideshow here. So,
Member Stevens, did you have a question?
Yeah, so when you're talking about the midpoint with the carbon option, so we're past the blue and orange down to that. Do you have any idea on the midpoint one for the three that are listed, like the size of these, like the mileage and stuff? How many miles it covers or not? Is that too granular for you today? I'm just trying to, as I'm looking at, do we want to cover big projects? How big is it? What are we talking about versus these smaller, the smaller projects, which you can kind of read into the size of them? But if you don't have it, that's fine.
So, Mr. Chair and members, we do have that in the application, so that would be easy enough to find out.
Okay, I mean, if you can get it to me, it'd help me in deciding, do I want to go with bigger ones or smaller ones when I'm looking at it? So thank you.
That seems like a perfect thing that technical committees could put into their table to bring back.
Thank you so much.
As a differentiating factor. Yep.
Yeah, but I think generally that polling question you raised is an interesting one. That 16 million.
Yep.
Do we prefer that you use that carbon reduction money and move it into some bike ped projects, which would be 3 big projects, or move it towards the safe routes to school projects, which would generate 23 or 24 projects?
Exactly.
Yeah. Member Martinson.
Thank you, Chair Hovland. So I've got a question about, these large multi-use trail projects for biking. It's not apparent to me that there is any scoring criteria or weighting that distinguishes trails that are primarily for recreational or leisure purposes from projects that are primarily oriented towards increasing the transportation network of cycle tracks throughout the Twin Cities. And I know we have a comprehensive cycle plan here at Met Council, but I don't know that that is reflected in the scoring. Is it? And if it's not, is that something for consideration for future? Thanks.
So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So, for instance, in the multi-use trail list, the biggest scoring criteria is if it's on the RBTN, Regional Bicycle Transportation Network, which is supposed to be transportation oriented. So that is worth 200 points out of 1,100. So that, and it usually drives if you're on or off the list, whether you're on that network.
Okay.
As you say, it is difficult to discern sometimes recreational use from transportation use, but that is a qualifying factor that we look at. And if you had a trail around a lake, for instance, we've disqualified a few like that were more recreational. But for the most part, it's tough for us to disqualify someone for that. So,
Elaine, you have a comment as well, I think.
I was actually going to say what Steve did say. TAB has approved that the trail projects should be a transportation purpose, and that's one of the qualifying criteria.
Yep, thank you. So we have this first set of questions, and it's on the next 3 slides. Let me just maybe introduce it so you see what's coming before you are sequential in nature. And it's going to zero in on that transit page in the tables. I'll get to it myself. I'm going to try and, again, keep it at policy level, but it's tough to kind of fully understand what we're talking about without looking at the tables a little bit. So one of the rules that TAB has put forth now for 2 cycles is that no more than $32 million of projects can be funded for BRT-type projects. 25 of that would be covered under the ABRT. So again, Metro Transit put a request in for the G line, which is Rice and Robert Street for $25 million. So that leaves $7 million in the transit expansion and transit modernization categories. We do have given the increase of funding, we get to the end of those transit lists and we have to ask the question, do we follow the rule as established, or are we flexible on that rule and want to kind of fully fund out the transit list, at least in the midpoint scenario? So we do have enough money, at least in midpoint, to fully fund the transit list, but we'd have to acknowledge that we'd have to be flexible on this rule as stated here. The TAC committee was asked this question, and they said people made decisions when they applied that they applied either in some of the transit categories or in bicycle pedestrian. There was kind of a flex project that was could have been applied in either, and they went away from the transit area because of this rule. So they made decisions based on this rule and applied elsewhere because they thought this rule was limiting their project's chances. So their preference at the TAC level would be to look into this rule further next round, which we're starting the next application, December, January. We're already thinking about the next cycle, 2024, to fix it. So that's the question, and I'll show you how it lays out on the table here. But that's the question: kind of fully invest in transit or not? And then question 2: if you say keep the rule as TAC is suggesting, do you want to keep that money in transit TDM and fund those last 2 TDM projects? And we'll show you what those are. That's worth $900,000. And then question 3, this is sequencing here, is with whatever money is available, what would you like to do with it? The TAC is saying we should shift that money to bicycle pedestrian because of the number of projects submitted there. But you do have other options as to how you could invest that money, split it between roadways and transit, give it all to roadways. There's a couple different things you could do.
All right, Commissioner Look, and then Member Joe Lally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've been thinking this over quite a bit. If we were to go with a midpoint scenario in which transit is fully funded, I think we need to look at this rule from the standpoint that right now there's some uncertainty as far as some of the BRT lines that are out there and why they're not successful. Red Line in particular and others that just don't have the ridership. And so I kind of look at the $25 million set aside as something that was maybe valuable in the past, but perhaps not as valuable today. And what would it look like then if we were to try and reallocate those dollars? And I kind of came up with the thought that, I think we do need to fully fund our safe routes to school. I don't think it should be an option as to whether our kids are less than safe trying to get to school. I mean, it's unreasonable. So we'd be able to use, that $25 million set aside as a funding source for that safe route to school. I think it's reasonable then to allocate the remaining dollars to every category. I think generally, equally allocated, I think you'd just about get another project in every single category. And I want to be fully transparent here. I don't think Anoka County benefits from this at all. But I think it would be reasonable to pause this for this solicitation cycle and not for the next one, but for this one, and to reallocate those dollars and again, take care of a big one, I think, such as the Safe Routes to School. One project I know, I don't live in Carver County, I'm not a commissioner in Carver County, but Carver County has a project there, I think on 5 that goes past the Arboretum, which if anyone's ever driven that, they know exactly what we're talking about. There's problems. That needs expansion. I think that was one of the projects that would be funded with this type of a move. So that would be my proposal. And hopefully there's others that would agree with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Jalali.
Thanks. So I had my hand up a couple topics ago. I do want to come back to and try to understand what you just brought up. But so when you were explaining this, I think it was this slide, like just a couple of minutes ago.
Keep going.
The one you just, that one, yep. So you were saying that under the current rule, there are projects that like applied and then expressed that they made decisions about how they identified themselves because of the way that this is written. I just want to kind of expand that a little so I can get my head around, like, can you give some examples of what were those applicants, if you're able to share it? What type of project were they trying to do? How did the rule affect how they identified themselves, and what are we seeing as a result of that? I just need a little bit more kind of real-world examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Yeah, I think they'd be fine sharing this because they shared in the committee. So one of them was Dakota County. I think the commissioner had mentioned this last meeting to some extent. But last cycle, they submitted a project, pedestrian bridge over Cedar Avenue, over the red line, in the transit modernization category. And in this cycle, they looked at the rules as written and said, we think our chances are better if we apply in the pedestrian facilities category. You know, they had a kind of a choice. There was some discretion there. But based on the rule, they made a decision not to go on transit and to go into pedestrian facilities.
So the challenge we're having, I just want to summarize back what I think my understanding is, and I very much welcome others' pushback or thoughts, but it sounds like there are projects that are connected to transit hubs and stations that created additional benefit for pedestrians, and some of these applicants are confused, like, am I a pedestrian project or am I a transit modernization project? And that we're not doing, it sounds like what we're saying is there's just not a clear enough way to get them the according, credit and correct identification. Am I summarizing this correctly, or would you describe that differently?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Many of these projects are highly multimodal, so they have, in some cases, a choice as to where they think they'll be most competitive. And it's not always kind of clear cut what they should do, and oftentimes we give them a choice where we can, that they can make a decision on.
And they are like local municipalities with additional funding, trying to get this funding so that they can build out the networks that our communities need? Or what are the applicants in this case? Just different counties? Yeah.
It could be a range of applicants.
Okay. I just had some fact-finding questions. It makes me think about the discussion we were just having about ridership being up, and also that we still don't have ADA compliance and are making investments to make these resources accessible to everyone. So I'm going to just end my thoughts there. I'm just trying to get my head around what we're talking about here, but thank you.
Thank you, Member Jalali. Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, Steve, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide, just a little, or one more, sorry. Thank you. So just a little more context around the $32 million max rule. So I was part of the group that created this rule in the first place. The intent of this rule was to make sure that BRT, due to the nature of our scoring process, didn't eat all the suburban transit providers' lunch, because they score great. BRT scores well based on how our measures were designed. They were scoring and blowing away every other transit provider that we had. So the intent of the rule was to basically say $25 million for BRT, another $7 million, which is effectively one fully funded transit project, would go to BRT, and the rest of the transit dollars would be available to either suburban providers or New Market Guarantee and other places. It was meant to help move the money around. It was not it's not an arbitrary, it was partially an arbitrary number of where we picked, but it had an intent of making sure that BRT didn't steal the entire pot. It wasn't that BRT shouldn't be invested in. It was just meant to make sure we put money everywhere else that was regionally significant. So just a little more context around why that rule was there. In this case, now that we have a bunch more money in the transit category, it does change the funding conversation, because the rule isn't really at play near as much as what it has been in previous solicitations because we have more money in the transit category. So just a little more context about where this came from in the first place, and why we came up with it and what we were trying to do.
Commissioner Holberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I guess in the packet, I think on mine it shows up page 13 of 21, when you're talking about whether, I mean, I think we should follow the rule. I illustrated this last month, you know, about where stuff goes and what it is. But as far as where we need to put more money, I mean, when you look at the breakdown of what percentage of projects are funded in roadways, at best out of 61, looks like 34, maybe 33 get funded. Out of transit, the worst case scenario, out of 21 applications, 19 get funded. In bike ped, out of 69 applications, you know, anywhere from 20 to 31 get funded. And then if you go to the far right column, you see the range in which you have to be off of the highest funded project to get money. And if you are in any of the road projects, you can't be more than half of what the top funded project is to get funded, where when you're in the transit realm, you can be in the 20-some% off of the top funded project, going back to, you know, is there any minimum qualifications? In other words, in some of these categories, we fund everything down to projects that score very low relative to the top. And I understand that each funding category is different, but if we're having a discussion that we have extra money, and where should we put it? If you look at transit compared to the other two funding areas, roadways and bike ped, they're way, you know, the vast majority of them are already funded, including ones that score very low are funded, where if you're in bike ped or roadways, only a fraction of the total applications are funded, and you have to score very high in order to get money. So I just put that out as a discussion point. I appreciate staff's effort in putting this chart together to try and illustrate the points that I tried to make last month that I didn't know if I was effective or not. So, I mean, for me, that's an important, if we're talking policy and if we're not talking individual projects, but if we're talking on how we're meeting the needs of the entire transportation sector for this region, it's a pretty clear illustration of where the underfunding is occurring and where there might be opportunities to put additional resources.
Commissioner, let me ask you a follow-on question there. As long as you've expressed that you thought that the rule should be maintained because people were responding to the solicitation under the existing rules, where would you then send additional funds? Do you have a preference there, or do you want to hear more discussion on that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, I see the need for bike ped, but I also see the need for road projects.
Yep.
I mean, I live in a very fast-growing community in which certain levels of density and growth are dictated by the Met Council. We have no state highway going east and west from 13 in Burnsville all the way down to Northfield, over 20 miles. And so the major arterials that are handling east-west traffic in Dakota County are borne by Dakota County taxpayers. 1/4 of the major arterial lane miles in the whole state of Minnesota that, you know, major arterials in the state of Minnesota that are not state highways are in Dakota County. Our county has 1/4 of those major arterials. So we carry a very huge regional burden in our road system on the backs of the Dakota County taxpayers. And we don't, those roads don't get equity points, you know, I mean, we're an anomaly in that other counties have more state highways within their counties to carry some of that, so I have a bias towards roads because the cost, I mean, the city of Lakeville paid 45% of 4 interchanges on 35W, given the cost share between counties and cities. They're building interchanges to tens of millions of dollars in debt on cities for interchanges on an interstate system.
Commissioner Cattell and then Commissioner Ulrich.
Yeah, I just want.
Oh, sorry. Did you have, there was somebody else?
Matt's after that.
Matt.
back.
After me,
Oh.
okay. All right, just trying to track everybody here. I know how this is. I sat in that chair last
Yeah,
month, so I know
remember
that.
Holland said-
That's
yeah.
really insightful. I just want to thank you for giving us that. Every county, every city is a little bit different, and then their burdens too. We hear a lot too from St. Paul because they have so many government agencies and they don't have a tax base, right, because of that, like some of the others. And so we hear a lot about things. So that's a really great perspective. I appreciate you putting that in context, and I thought your comments last month were really great too. And so, yeah, we looked at the regional solicitation at the county, and I sat down with staff and, looking at this, and we also slightly preferred the bike ped heavy scenario. There's so many projects that are not funded, and we would like to see those funded, and so that would be our look at this, because it's really not detracting from the critical roadway and bridge infrastructure, which county sees as a big piece too, because we have a lot of bridges. We have a lot more bridges and a lot of people, and they're aging too, like many of us. We have very aging bridges, so that's one thing. On the carbon reduction program, option 1 prioritizes bikeways over pedestrian and safe routes to schools. So we're going to continue to go along with that too. I think that's one of those things when it comes to ADA compliance and safe routes. Even my biggest complaint too is we need safe routes to bus shelters as well as to schools. And so, those are some of the things that we look. So, as we look at the climate action plan, having bikeway projects that are more finely, influence the modal shift. So we have the at least the ability to do that. And looking at the bus rapid transit rule, I know that this rule, and I know the intent of this rule because I was there when we started to talk about the intent of the rule, and it was to make sure that we did get a bus rapid transit funded, but that they were not only bus rapid transit. And county actually believes in this, but we know there's the rule, and so we're looking at doing at least right now, supporting the rule. I know we might revisit that rule with these kinds of funding scenarios coming forward, and this is a once in a lifetime to have 5 years of extra funding. And so we would think that, it should be the leftover dollars should be in other modal care categories, such as bicycle and pedestrian facilities, such as that. Again, those are very underfunded, and so that's kind of how the county leans toward that.
Commissioner Ulrich, then Member Holland said.
I'd keep the rule. If we have a rule, we should keep it. We shouldn't deviate in midstream here. In bike ped heavy carbon 2, all the safe routes to school are funded, which is a good thing. And I'd reprogram the money to roadway or bike ped. I could support Hennepin on the bike ped, but I think we absolutely have to keep that rule. Transit generally is we get all these reports on ridership, and if you look deeper into the numbers, it's not all as positive as it sounds. Transit has not rebounded. I mean, some BRT routes are performing well. Some highway BRTs are performing terribly. Some of the, we need, I think, to look at transit, and should we be investing as much going forward when it's so uncertain whether we're going to rebound, whether it's, Express to Minneapolis with MPCA is not where it was. We also need to look at the safety of our transportation system. People are not wanting to, I'm glad to hear about the airport upgrade, but we're hearing reports that people don't want to take the light rail because it's not safe. I think we need to study transit in all our dimensions and be careful about where we're investing, maybe slow down some of the transit until we see where we're at.
Commissioner, could I get a clarification from you? If you favor maintaining the rule, not
Yes.
breaking the BRT rule?
Right.
And then if the rule is maintained, is your preference to send money to bike ped or split it in some other form or fashion?
Well, my preference would be for more roadway project, but I could accept bike ped as well.
So splitting it in some fashion, is that what you're saying?
That would be good.
Okay, all right. I don't mean to put words in your mouth. Member Hollinshead, then Member Foster.
Or Barbara.
Oh,
I'm wondering if we keep the rule, why we don't increase the set-aside if we've got more money. Because as the ridership, as Barb's report on the ridership indicates, ABRT is the fast-growing category of transit. So, to me, if we keep the rule, we should actually increase the set-aside for ABRT and build it out even faster. Maybe, Barb, do you want to respond to that? Or I wonder why we're not discussing that.
Mr.
Member
Chair,
Barber?
I actually think that we should keep the rule. I think you should keep the rule in place for this cycle. Now, it was somewhat arbitrary how we picked that number. However, I think for the next cycle, what we need to do is look at it as a percentage rather than a dollar amount, because that's where now we're having the conversation on the other side of things from the last time. So I think if we look at it from that perspective, it makes sense. As to still having this set aside for the $25 million, I think I was pretty clear in my ridership report. I've been very clear throughout the pandemic where our ridership has been maintained is on our ABRT lines. They are successful and they are liked. That is where our ridership is very strong, and I very much advise against not having the set aside for the $25 million.
all right, I'm going to go to Member Foster and then Member Commissioner Modest Castillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in support of keeping the rule. It's been in place. I think it would be unfair to projects that submitted under it to be told no, because we're changing a rule that you didn't know was going to be changed, and then moving the money to bike ped. I think one thing that is not in question about what's going to change in our future is climate change. Like, that is coming, whether or not we want to accept it. And so it's easy to get it in conversations about, like, public transit is unsafe right now. The ways that we make our transit system safer are by funding it and funding alternatives to policing through the legislature. Metro Transit has been working on this with transit ambassadors. There's more, like, local ways that we can address those issues and not through the tab and massive amounts of funding. So I just encourage us to think beyond what is happening right now on public transit as a way to define how we fund it. Yeah, I'll just end there. Thank you.
Okay, and if the rule's maintained and there's additional funds to be allocated, some are suggesting send it to bike ped or split it between highways and bike ped. What's your thought?
Bike ped.
Okay, and now, let's see, I'm going to go to, who is it?
Staff wanted to
Remember,
Mr. Chair, I think staff.
I can go in the queue, that's fine.
oh.
Let me at the back of the queue.
Oh,
Jump to the next one, sir.
that staff guy wanted to say something? Is he part of the debate? Okay, I'm going to go to Commissioner Modest Castillo and then back to Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to grow the growing chorus of supporting the current rule as it is. You know, as Member Barber pointed out, these fund ABRT lines, which are high performing. We want to reiterate that. And just going back to Commissioner Look, the last one that was funded, the F line, actually connects to Anoka County. So Anoka County does benefit from these funds and continuation of these rules. I would not want to change the rules midstream. Applications have already been received. And since I know your follow-up question will be, I will strongly support carbon option 2 and any remaining go to bike ped. I want to support Commissioner Foster's comment about climate change. Member Foster, Commissioner, we can promote you to whatever. Around climate change, but also because we've had that long list of bike ped that has gone unfunded. We have a once in a lifetime or once in many years opportunity to get those out. And it will increase the connection to our transit sites when we improve bike ped, as Member Martinson's comments earlier about those connections and scoring, so I just wanted to lift that up.
Okay, I'm going to go to Member Geisler and then Member Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the rule stands, I say leave the BRT funding as it is and the structure as it is, and I think if we follow the rule, just to answer those point questions, I think we roll over into the bike ped. We've been debating funding more in bike ped for the last 3-4 solicitations, I think practically every time that I've been here. So it's a category that needs it. And I just wanted to just make a side comment on the ridership. VMT's down too. So if vehicle miles traveled are down 8-12% as well, so people are using roads less. So I don't think ridership is the sole indicator or usage is the sole indicator of everything. Yes, there's a need everywhere. There's a reason why we have these categories. There's a reason why we're funding them or why we're discussing it. So, thank you.
And how about with respect to the carbon reduction funds?
Carbon reduction, I think option 2, which funds not the multi-use trails, but rather the other categories, I think it spreads the money around the region better. I think multiple impact in multiple areas is a better intent of what that money's supposed to do, in my opinion. So I think that's a better option. So I would personally go with midpoint option 2 and then maintain the BRT rule as a whole thing.
All right, that's a safe routes to school preference on the carbon reduction.
Yep.
All right, then I'm going to go to Member Dugan, then back to Commissioner Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. By way of history, my recollection is that we changed we went to the 25 million on ABRT because we were funding about 7 million a year, and I think it was about 25 to 28 million to get an ABRT or BRT line up. And collectively, we said, we're just, fooling around. We're going year after year after year. Let's just get something done. And that's where that came from. I like what Member Geisler said, about spreading the money around. I think, and I also have a little bit of concern. I realize there's future funding called for right now, but, things change. And to count on money in the future so that we can change everything, I'm not sure that would be prudent. And I do like what Commissioner Foster said. You're a commissioner now.
It's a member.
So
he's
have to run now. There's a future
not to change rules in the middle of the game.
Well, she's kind of the commissioner of transit, I'd say.
Yeah.
For that. All right, I'm going to go to Commissioner Holberg and then Commissioner Karwoski.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair, and I kind of failed to maybe put my cards on the table. I think the rule should stay. And because if we're kind of veering towards the bike ped heavy as an option, I would ask the group to at least consider some of these extra funds, whether it's the 900 and some thousand that's extra in this transit or unspent unique project money to go into the road area. In 2018, we had transit was at 27%. It was shifted to 30 in 2020. And they took money from roadways back then, in order to accommodate that. I just think that, throw us a bone, a little bit more money in the roadway. We need it. We really do. And if we choose bike ped heavy as the option, any extra money, people are saying that they wanted to go to bike ped, but we already made the decision and the road projects don't qualify for any of the carbon money either. That's gonna end up on trails and bike ped as well. So I'd like the group to at least consider that if there's any extras in these categories that we put them into roads.
How about your thoughts on the carbon reduction money as long as you've got the floor? How to use that, whether that should be...
I think spreading it around as much as possible
safe routes to
makes
school.
sense. Yes.
Okay, all right, very good. And then Commissioner Karwoski.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Chair.
and then Member Stevens.
Yes, Washington County supports abiding by the rule for all the reasons mentioned. As far as distributing excess money, safe routes to schools, strong. There is a lot of natural shift of ped trail money. So I would support somehow dividing some of that excess money towards roads because they are short and there's a lot of new money going to pedways.
Thank you. Next is Member Stevens, then back to Member Hollinshead, then Martinson, Jepson, and Jalali. Member Stevens.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'd stay with the base funding, the midpoint in the blue. I agree with following the rule as well. I appreciate the comments in the presentation and for Commissioner Jalali on, the tension we're causing. We have to remember as policymakers, there's real stuff happening out there with these applicants that are investing a whole lot of time. And the last thing we want to do is create confusion with them and having them to decide themselves what category is the most competitive for them. And we have to be careful, I'd say, we should say don't shift unless we have a really compelling reason to change a rule, and particularly if it's one that hasn't been around for a real long time. So, I'm in favor of that. I'd do a mixture of the allocation too. I think spread some to roadway and some to bike, and same with the carbon money. We're only going to spend 2 years of it. Let's distribute it as broadly as we can, and then looking forward to seeing MnDOT's program on, how they're going to reduce carbon emissions, and then use those remaining funds and follow more in line with them. But right now, I'd say a broad application would be
We'll
good.
try to get the 23, 24 ADA Safe Routes to School projects as opposed to the 3 trail projects in the carbon reduction category? Okay, all right, thanks. And then back to Member Hollinshead, and then on to Member Martinson, and then Member Jepson. And Steve, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Steve's up there.
Thanks.
Somebody look to me.
Not, I do.
You need to sit down for a second here. No, just so people know kind of the level of magnitude of what dollars we're talking about, that's, if you look way down on your chart, the money we're talking about in the transit area, in the midpoint scenario is $4 million, and it's $3 million in bike ped. And the footnote underneath there, and we talked about this in TAB Executive a little bit, TAC recommended, following the rule, not funding this 2 TDM, and then shifting to bike ped. So we've done that, so that's shown in the chart. So if you want to do something different, you can do that. If you want to do something different, say if you want to split it between roadways and bike ped, the number of projects would look differently. So we'd have to go into the bike ped list and then cull the list a little bit for whatever kind of decision comes out of this body.
Elaine?
Yeah, one point I also make, the carbon reduction funding that's being allocated for the years 2023 and 2024, and staff did look at the projects that applied, which they could take it, so traffic management technology projects can, but the earliest that they applied for was 2026, so none were selected on that. So you had to, some of it was limited to what projects could go that early.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve.
Yep.
So how does that comment and Member Stevens' comment interface with your notion that the last thing we ought to be doing in November is looking at those, or that one of the, I guess, one of the first things we do in November is look at the base options, which are either the midpoint or the bike ped heavy. How does that interface with what you just described? Does it create more work for you?
No, so we would, you're asking where, kind of that third question, I think, is where did the money go? If I'm hearing you right, seems like we're coming to consensus about follow the rule. I didn't hear much about those 2 TDM projects here,
Right.
but that was question number 2. Didn't hear kind of yes or no on that, but, so I assume no. And then the third question is where to shift this 4 million and 3 million respectively. And so I think we would like some direction today so that tomorrow we can have a kind of a close to final set of options for funding and programming so they can start weighing those for you.
So repeat the question that you need answered that we haven't answered
Well,
yet.
yeah, so it was that third question on the PowerPoint. And the question is where to transfer that 3 million and 4 million and $3 million based on the scenario. And
there we had 2 unfunded TDM projects because we spent all the money in TDM. So you could therefore spend about $1 million on TDM.
Yes.
And shift the remaining money into other categories. So the available funds of TDM is funded, if I remember right, is 3 million at the midpoint, 2.8 for bike ped heavy.
Right, yeah, so that was, so you're on that question, slide 11, the question number 2, do you want to fund those TDM projects? Because we haven't broached that topic here, but then mostly we've been almost skipping to the third question, slide 12, where to shift the money. And we got kind of a few different ideas, it seems like today, mostly I would think bike ped, but heard some about splitting the money in some way. So I don't know if
Yeah,
we've resolved that, at least that third question yet.
So as folks are making their comments, maybe we could try to address that TDM issue too.
Yep.
We've got 2 unfunded TDM projects, so
So it's B.
we could spend $1 million on those TDM projects, which would leave that money in the transit category,
Correct, yep.
which is, and we've got transit, we got more money in transit than we had before. Or we could shift that remaining money, that 3 million, to another category, or if you spent the million, you still have 2 million to reallocate. So people might think about that as well. And then the question we haven't even touched yet is the unique projects money. And I'm gonna turn to, as soon as we get done with this broader discussion, I'm gonna turn to probably Member Geisler
There's still more
to
questions.
kind of recap what we did. Commissioner?
Well, I had a question. It does seem to me it's hard to know where to shift extra money until we decide which base option, which carbon option, and then we would know where to shift money. I can't say anything about shifting extra money until I know base one, or the base choice, and then the carbon choice. It's impossible to make.
All right, let's continue on the path we're going on then.
Wouldn't you agree? It's tough to make that choice.
Well, maybe just to respond to that quickly, Mr. Oh, someone's calling.
Wow. It's, John hit the jackpot.
Yeah. Right now, we have shifted that money based on the TAC recommendation. So $3 and $4 million. If you wanted to hold back that until next meeting and then make that decision, we could do that. We'd pull that money out of bike ped where it is right now.
Okay, I didn't understand.
So we could,
Yeah, me either.
So that's already.
It's on the bike ped list, yeah.
Have you already done some with the unique project money?
We did, and that was based on the recommendation of the scoring committee, because we wanted, what we heard from our TAC members is we want to see how this is kind of coming, what this list is looking like before we respond to it. So if you do something different with the unique project list, then some of those last few projects in bike ped, we would remove.
So everything we see here is taking into effect all the extra money, including unique projects?
It is.
No.
Yeah, that's what he just
Yep.
said.
Yeah, it
And
assumes
the
the scoring
9.4
recommendation of that committee, which was fund the TBI and then the first highest scoring project. And then it shifted $2 million to bike ped. And that's shown in projects on the list.
But isn't there still 944 at TDM? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Commissioner.
If this body chooses not to fund those last 2 projects, where's the 944 right now? It's on the table, right? It's not in any of those scenarios.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and members, so that 944 is in the bike ped list.
Oh, so you assumed that we said no to the additional 2 projects? And is that consensus?
Follow the tax recommendations.
Oh, okay.
That
Yep.
provided this
Okay.
information, which shows the money shifted and is what we're looking at, correct?
Thank you, yep.
It's confusing.
Okay, let's go back to Member Holland's head. I hope that didn't, I hope that helped.
I don't know if I remember my question. I just want to comment that, yes, the suburbs are growing, pandemic and previous trends, but where I live in St. Paul, the apartments are still going up along the B line, soon to be B line, and in other places that could be served by ABRT, and we don't have any space for greater lanes, traffic lanes or roads. So the only way we can expand is multimodal, whether it's bike ped or transit. So I can't stress this strongly enough that in the areas where transit is best and strongest, the densest areas, we still need more. So, and that need will increase as the pandemic recedes and as people continue to grow the ABRT ridership. So I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Member
Chair.
Holmstead. Then I'll go to Member Martinson, then Member Jepson, and then Member Jalali.
Thank you, Chair Hovland. So I support the sticking with the rule the way it is, because that's fair, that's equitable to the applicants. I do support also Member Barber's suggestion that we revisit this to make it a relative allocation as opposed to an absolute amount, specifically because these dollar amounts don't seem to be consistent across periods of time. Being the sole non-motorized rep on the tab, I am obligated to say that the money that we're going to be moving should be given to bike and ped. And also just noting that we already distribute over half of the funding coming into roadways, and so I can't support that. Something else that I wanted to point, well, two other things. So when we talk about the carbon options 1 or 2, and I support carbon option 2, those are for the next 2 years of carbon option money, but we understand that that money's got future legs as well. And so I'm hoping that in out years from these, we can also envision things like an e-bike reimbursement or incentive program that has been shown elsewhere to lead to significant mode shift. And I think that is the clear intent of the carbon reduction money, is to create mode shift, reducing carbon emissions. And I think that an e-bike incentive program would be something that would be a great way to make that happen. It is also part of the Minnesota Climate Action Framework, that those kinds of incentives be put in place for not just electric vehicle cars, but for e-bikes as well. Then the final thing I wanted to say, and this is, I'm surprised no one else has brought it up, but I do think that we have, so this is responding to Commissioner Look's point. This would be the worst possible time in history to slow down the build out of the Network Next program of ABRT. For the last 30 years, money has been cheap to free. Those days are gone. The money we have now is the last inexpensive money we're going to see for a long, long time. So this would not be the time to not be building out the ABRT system that we've got, just from a standpoint of fiscal responsibility. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Jepson.
Yes, thank you. So I apologize, I'm new to this. I'm learning as I go. So to answer your questions, I would like to keep the rule. I'm in support of midpoint CARB 2. For the excess funds, I will always support roads. To your point, Member Hallberg, Commissioner Hallberg, I apologize. The suburbs are really, really hurting. A year ago, next week, Tuesday, a woman was hit and killed on 109th in Blaine. 6 months ago, an individual was hit and killed on 109th and Central Avenue. The car flew over 100 feet. To me, roads is about life and death in Blaine. It's not about convenience. Unfortunately, right now, it's not about carbon footprint. For me and my community, it's about life and death. And roads, for me, will always be the #1 priority, especially in my city of Blaine. I would recommend it going to roads, but primarily the strategic capacity of which, like Commissioner Look, you don't want to put Anoka County as a recipient for some of these funds, and I commend you for that, but I am absolutely going to focus on strategic capacity because my road, 109th, running right through my city, is one of those projects, and we need the help. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Jepson. Now Member Jalali.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to register my support for keeping the rule as is. I think people have made a lot of good points, but to me, one of them is just from a process standpoint. This is what we've been doing. I think it's important to talk about for the future, but for the short term, we should not change the rules in the middle of the process. I did appreciate the conversation about why we originally had it that way. I think that's actually a very important policy discussion. We should keep unpacking that. But I support keeping the rule. St. Paul strongly supports a bike ped heavy approach. For the last few years, we've done midpoint. I agree with the points that have been made that we actually need to be forward facing and thinking about this more comprehensively. I believe that approach yields greater safety for everyone if we can get people part of a connected network where you can safely travel without being in a car, which is one of the most unsafe modes of travel in the state right now. Just, that is the number one way that people die unexpectedly. It is the riskiest thing that people do as a course of their day. And if we keep making funding and policy choices that essentially require people to have car ownership because they don't have other ways to get around the region, that's that much more risk on our communities. I want to see more of a balance, and I think being bike ped heavy helps us do that. I also wanted to register my support for carbon option 2 and speak to just the overall importance of making sure that we can make thoughtful decisions with the remaining funds, and I think that sets us up the best to do that. And I think those are my main points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Jalali. Member Koski, and then Mayor Winchell.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm piling on to keep the rule. Again, to follow up with her, just not changing in the middle of the process feels a little better to me as a new member as well. And then I also recommend the remaining funds move to bike ped, just due to the high demand. And I'm just trying to go through all of your questions that you're going to ask. So carbon option 2 is also where I support. So hope that helps simplify and keep us moving through this.
It does. Thank you, Member Koski. And then on to Mayor Winchell, and then back to Member Barber.
So, I would like to agree with Member Holberg as far as we're growing really fast and we need roadways. We don't have transit. We don't have that ability where Member Hollins had said that they don't have the road expansion, they gotta do, but we're a big area. We have to look at all aspects of that. We're growing very rapidly out in the southwest, and we don't have the road systems to do that, and we have one transit system that doesn't give us the door-to-door service like others. We can get to Minneapolis, and now with the Prime, we can get around more. But, I'm not disagreeing about moving money to bike ped, but we have a policy also about how much goes to bike ped. What's that percentage? If we start putting all this money in bike ped, what is that percentage then? Do we start crossing over that? I mean, I think it's clearly something to look at. I totally agree about safe routes to school. I think that's important, and that's part of that. And I've made the spiel many times. Every road project we do, there are additions to bike ped upgrades that connect more and more roads that create better and better systems. So we can't always just say, put it all to bike ped when they're always in a road system already. And so I think we gotta find is a balance of that. But I'm curious if we just take and flip everything to bike ped and go bike ped heavy, what is that percentage? Does that cross us
Yeah, we
pretty
can give-
far
I
over
think-
the percentage?
I think Steve can give us that percentage and,
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Yep.
Chair. So, the answer's on the screen, and you are right, especially in the bike ped heavy scenario, because remember, bike ped heavy in its makeup was going to the top of that modal funding range, which is 20% of the total pot goes to bike ped. So if we add in this kind of excess transit money, it's small, but it goes from 20 to 21%, and then if you add in the unique projects, probably ticks on another 1%. So now, maybe you're close to 22% of the pot going to bicycle pedestrian. So that's, we try to acknowledge that on the slide here for folks.
Because I think we're hitting the bike ped, we're hitting those numbers, but are we losing numbers now in transit? Not transit, excuse me.
But in roadway?
Roadways.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
well, I think recall, Mayor, that when we started the conversation, and this is a decision we gotta make next month, is the base scenario of midpoint or bike ped heavy, that when we've used that traditional model of taking the midpoint and then running all those scenarios off the midpoint, if you move from midpoint to bike heavy, what happens there, if I took notes correctly, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, it takes a 10 to 11 million away from roadways, and it takes 5 million away from transit to go to bike heavy. So if you stuck with the traditional, that would keep that 10 to 11 million dollars in the roadway category.
And if you're looking which way I'm leaning, I think you can kind of tell, it's probably the midpoint with option 2 and keeping the, follow the rules.
On the carbon reduction, going to the safe routes to school?
Yeah, and there,
Bang for
under
the
that
buck.
one, there's one project that isn't funded, and if there's extra money, everyone seems to be in agreement on safe routes, is somehow maybe shift the funds to that one project, and then we got everything covered on safe route to schools.
I'm going to go to, now, thank you, Mayor. Member Barber, and then Mayor Stephenson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to comment that, we are shifting some money when we look at the bike pedestrian heavy scenario, but roadway still gets well over half of the money that we're distributing for this cycle. And so I think it's important to keep that into consideration. I think with the high concentration of projects that we got that were non-motorized, whether it was trails, safe routes to school, those different options, I think it makes a lot of sense to go with the bike ped heavy option. And when you look at the projects, there was a lot of conversation back and forth whether funding, 3 big trails things or all the other ones. If we go with option 2, you still fund 2 of those big trail things and all of the other stuff. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor?
Thank you. I think that my preference is the midpoint with option 2. I agree with Mayor Winchell and the other mayors who've spoken. In the suburban community, the outlying counties, we need roadways. We need expansion. I know I've heard that some of the funds, it's like half the funds, over half the funds go to roadways. I would say that, I don't know what the percentages of usage by the citizens of our 7-county metro area is, but it's gotta be 80+% of the people spend the majority of their time in their car. I think we have to address what the needs are of the entire system. We have said that we're gonna put all the carbon monies into bike ped. That's what we should do. And that means that we've gone really to a bike-heavy program without changing the midpoint for roads. So I think that way we are doing both, instead of just bike ped. I think that's my position.
All right, thanks, Mayor. Member Schlumber, and then back to Commissioner Guttel.
Okay, so I'll be quick. I am a huge user of the trails and systems, and I've seen communities that have great trails and communities that have terrible trails. And so I'm a big fan of trails, but I think in this case, the rule stays. That's easy to, everybody is consensed on that. I think we should be using the midpoint. Many discussions through previous tab meetings have landed on the midpoint. I think the roads have to be funded, as Commissioner Holberg and Mayor Winchell. I mean, we have to fund the roads. Those have a huge impact on the economy and of the 7-county metro area. And it's not just the cities that need to be supported here. It's the outstate or out-region areas that have to be supported as well. So I think we should be in the midpoint. I would shift the money that we have left on carbon to safe routes. But I feel like we're not supporting roads, and that's what's driving the economy of the 7-county metro area. And there are many other factors that will cause people to either use cars or not use cars. And it's a false narrative to say that if we constrain roads, people will stop using cars. I don't think that's true. It just will mean we are less efficient and we'll be spending more time in cars. There's other things that will cause people to stop using cars.
Thank you.
Mainly where they live.
Yeah.
Commissioner Guttel, then Member Lewis.
And I just wanted to weigh in on that last question, which I didn't, so I just wanted to go back to polling question 2, on the remaining transit and TDM funds. County's under the opinion to not fund the TDM projects, but then to shift the funds to bicycle and pedestrian and other types of modal facilities that are needed.
Okay, all right, Member Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be on the record with my position on it,
keep the funding as is. Bike ped heavy and carbon too. I wanted to, second member Holland's point. I think you see some of the same trends in the first ring suburbs as well.
Member Lewis, I think you're going to have to, use that microphone, especially with your mask on.
Not a problem. I think you see some of the same trends in the first ring suburbs as well. The roadway network is basically where it is. And so where is the opportunity for improvement? I think you see it in bike ped. I think you see the demand for that in our communities. And I also wanted to second, as a fairly new member, Member Geisler's point about the history of demand for bike ped projects as well. And if that's in fact something that we've been seeking to fund for some time, now's the time to do it. Should take advantage of that. And we certainly have the next solicitation to revisit the remaining priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Lewis. And then Member Jepson.
Thanks, sir. So thank you, Member Jalali, for saying that cars are probably the least safe mode of transportation out there. It is clearly evident that they are, but unfortunately, again, in my city, in my county, there are no other options, very few options, particularly in my city. Just really appreciate Mayor Winchell commenting on that all the roads that we are designing and reconstructing all include bike ped and bike ped safety. And then to Mayor Stevenson's comment, 93% of Blaine residents use their car to get to work. 93%. We have no other mode of transportation in that city for the majority of us to get from A to B. So you had mentioned 80. For me, it's 93. It's a high number.
Member Jalali.
Thank you. I guess the regional view that I think is important then is having transportation projects so that they have options. Because I do think there'll be people who use cars. That's going to be true for a long time, actually. But then when we connect that to arguments for taking funding away from BRT and things that actually allow people to get from where they live to another city that might be a major job center or someplace nearby, regional bus service, in-city bus service, it will help over time. So I just wanted to connect the dots. I appreciate what you said. I hear you. And I think it's about transitioning into a future system where there are more options for everyone and recognizing right now there are folks who, they don't have any other option. They do deserve safety right now. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Jalali. And then Commissioner Ulrich.
I'm not sure, first of all, I understand that all the money is baked into these charts, so if you want to do something different, it's changing these charts as we're looking at them now. But as I look at roadway reconstruction and modernization, the midpoint funds one less roadway project. It's actually the bike ped that funds one more project in this category. It's a $7 million project in Carver County. So I just want to point that out.
Right. Yeah. Member Anderson.
I think I agree with the group on the BRT rule. I particularly felt sympathetic with Member Schember's comments, and I agree with what he's saying. We have the grandest of intentions when we're here, and I think we do good work. But there's two things that we can't change. One is we live in Minnesota, where the days get short in the winter and it's damn cold. And that really limits people's options for safe travel on bike and pedestrian. Half my cities are in the transit taxing district, about half aren't. So, some of us don't have options as well. And I've got a question for Steve, and I guess maybe this is basic and I'm just not understanding it, but, this solicitation, we had certainly a lot more money than we've had in the past solicitations that I've been here for. Do we have any sense of what's going to happen for the next one? Is some of these dollars baked into the next solicitation, or is this a one-time thing?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This solicitation will be higher than the next solicitation, and part of the reason is we're advantaged by several years of increases from 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and the bulk of the money is 26 and 27. So we've got the increase from those earlier years that's all piling up to give us the 300 million versus 200 million. But in the future, instead of 200 million, it's gonna be more like 250. So, you know, you're not gonna have 300, but you're gonna have more than before. You're gonna have probably somewhere in between.
Thank you.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I wanted to call back a little bit to Member Ulrich, or Commissioner Ulrich's point there about, we kind of need to know which base funding scenario to decide where to roll over funding to an extent. And, you know, the reason why I advocate for the midpoint, but rolling over to bike ped, is to effectively try to get both, but keep roads funded. If we go bike ped heavy, I would advocate for rolling it over to roads. So, you know, I mean, that's the point, right, is what's the base scenario, and then where do you do the rollover? That's why I think the midpoint's the easiest to look at, and then allocate the rollovers into the places where we see some point need right now. And then I just want to also, Member Ulrich, you know, you mentioned that under the bike ped heavy, that Carver gets another roadway construction. They lose a strategic capacity, so actually you're short 3 million fewer, and Anoka County loses out 10 million on an interchange in my backyard too, which is, not to get parochial, but a pretty big deal for our community too. So, you know, I really think the midpoint, but then rolling over to the bike ped heavy to address all these bike ped heavy conversations that we want, really helps accomplish as many of these things as we can all together at once. That's just kind of my holistic view of they do flex on each other, depending on which base scenario we select.
All right, thanks for that. How about a little conversation around unique projects? And I don't know if we've, you know, there's just so many wonderful opinions that have been expressed here. If we're getting to the point where we're sort of informally giving you the information you need without specifically polling. But, you know, maybe you can contemplate that while we take on this unique projects notion. And we had about a dozen people on that committee. And of course, one of the problems we've had is we've never been able to really define, well, what's a unique or an innovative project? And so folks are applying in those categories, and we had, I think, 4.5 million in that category. And one of the things we knew we needed to fund was the travel behavior inventory, the TBI, that we had committed to funding several years ago over a series of years. So that was a continuous sort of obligation that we felt that the TAB had. So that took care of some of the money. That was $733,000. That left us with just short of 4 million, and then we had several projects to discuss within the context of that that unique funding category. And so I'm going to turn to Member Geisler, who was part of that group, along with several of us here, and others on the committee can comment as well, but to just kind of lead us through where we were and what the conclusions we came to. If that's, you feel comfortable with that?
I can do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the gist of the approach here is that we did have a scoring committee that went through and were given measures and submeasures and guidance on how to score them on a 1 to 5. So it's a very qualitative scoring. It is not scored like any of the other regional solicitation projects we had that have really hard numbers, very basic. It is based on our impression of how the project addressed various categories. Various members took that to a detail, took that to a summary level, took that to a force rank project. So we had it was basically an input into our discussion to say, what do we think was good? What do we think was okay? What do we think maybe not? The scores came out about in the middle. As we had our conversation, we kind of revolved around, there are 2 projects, the mobility hubs and EV spot, that are scoring about the same. They're both good as far as the qualitative assessment went, or effectively are together. And then a third project we all felt didn't need to be funded. And the TBI was accepted by everybody. As we had the discussion, one of the things that we came out through was that, you know, the intent of the innovative project or the unique product category was to do things that have not been done in the region before, but not necessarily cutting edge, bleeding edge, never been done before. So if Portland did it, or Denver did it, or somewhere out east did it, but we haven't done it before, that was kind of the intent of when we spun this category up, was to provide seed money for first tries. We did that with the EV car sharing the last cycle we're doing this seed money, it's a public-private partnership. There were a lot of hallmarks that said, this is a first time, let's go. As we had that discussion, we got down to saying, the EV spot network felt in a way that it was an expansion of the program we funded previously, so it wasn't as unique. The mobility hubs is a seed money type project. Let's start it for the first time. It's been proven out elsewhere, but not here. And as we polled the group, about half said TBI only, no project, half said 2 projects, TBI only, and that's kind of where we landed as a recommendation together. And I'm just trying to do a quick summary here. So ultimately, we ended up with funding the TBI and mobility hubs as our recommendation for those reasons behind not only the scoring, but also kind of the qualifying criteria to it. And I'd be happy to let my other peers who are on the scoring and committee chip in beyond that.
And I think, well, you might want to comment on this as well, and I can too, but we got a letter from the city of St. Paul saying, well, there was only 1/10 of a point difference between our EV spot network request and the mobility hubs. But as you point out, the scoring was really more qualitative, just an element of what we were trying to do. It was more of an input for us from a guiding standpoint. And so, though they were closely scored, I think you well explained why we either came to the conclusion that fund the TBI and move the remaining money somewhere else, or fund the TBI and the mobility hub project because it was unique, a first-time sort of endeavor, and that would leave us $2.167 million remaining to allocate somewhere else. So, Member Jalali, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to speak in support of option B, but if we're still doing discussion and stuff, I can wait.
Sure, but it's appropriate, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess since you mentioned the letter from the city, I can speak a little bit to contextualize part of where our position and advocacy is coming from. I think this body knows, prior to even me serving on it, when Councilmember Tolbert was serving on it, that the EV spot network received very important investment from the TAB to help start this project. I want to just add in that I've heard a couple times people mentioning this isn't a pilot anymore, or this is in a different stage. The EV network has only been operating for 6 months. I think most pilot programs would consider that within a pilot phase. Like, it actually is still very much in its initial stages. And also in the data that we have, and I can just share, I'm sure this has been also shared with you, but as it currently operates now, there's a fleet of 101 electric vehicles that are accessible, affordable community car share in geographically diverse parts of Minneapolis and St. Paul. There's 71 public and dedicated car share chargers, and this has been, in its first 6 months, a nearly 25,000 trips, totaling almost 250,000 miles that actually are happening without emissions, reducing an estimated 799 metric tons of greenhouse gas. That number alone just needs to be said and given weight. And this is the one that I think is the most interesting, an estimated $2.8 million in savings on transportation costs for area residents, including nearly $1 million in estimated savings to very low-income households. This is, I think, a project that embodies what is possible when all of the pieces work together. A nonprofit community organization with the expertise for how to administer and run the day-to-day operations. Federal funding and additional funding that passes through this body with community input for a regional asset. City of St. Paul and City of Minneapolis additionally adding their funding to help build out the charging network, do the staffing costs to get it up and running, and investing over $1 million, if not more, of our own funding into creating the regional resource. And then there's, of course, Xcel Energy, which is the corporate sector coming in to help build out the charging stations. And the charging stations are usable by everyone. Like, it's a free public charging station. You can just go and hook up your car. And that's important because one of the reasons that electric vehicles as a consumer choice still face challenges to adoption is there's this understandable conception, we are now finally changing that people know where there's a gas station. They don't know where there's an EV station. They don't understand you can plug the car into the garage like I do at my house. They don't understand that you could just go plug it to a public charger. This is creating visible places where people can charge the cars, and then we're seeing already millions of dollars in residents' pockets that they're not spending on transportation. And also, and this is where I'll speak for it myself, I have an EV membership. I can go to Blaine, I can go to the Mall of America, I can go to Wayzata, I can visit my family in Minnetonka. Like, I suddenly now have the ability to do my life in a way that I couldn't before because I don't have a car, but I do have an EV membership, and I can use the bus and rail around me to get to where I need to go. So I just want to kind of tell the story a little because I think that's important in what we're talking about. And then coming to the scoring issue, it is our understanding that had they been scored in the correct way, EV would have also made it into the final and been able to be funded. And so I think that considering just the way that the numbers were calculated, that raises concern, and then the very obvious demonstrated benefit to all of our communities, and additionally, the fact that it is actually in a stage of the project that I think is highly relevant to continue supporting, and the fact that it does not actually necessarily take away the other project that wants to get funded as well. We would very much like to respectfully request this group's support of option B. That allows it to also get funded. It allows the TBI mobility hubs to get funded, and we could move forward together as we have. So I welcome others' thoughts, feedback, questions, concerns. I'm just one of many people who's been working to make this project happen, but would like to hear from others too. That's all. Thank you.
I think one add-on there might be, I think when we helped fund this project initially, it was $4 million that we provided in funding. Anyway, so under option B, if we funded the TBI, the mobility hubs, and the EV spot network projects, that would allocate about 3.775 million of the 4.5, leaving 727,000 undistributed. So that's on slide 13, if folks are thinking about what the different options are. So I know we've got folks that want to speak to this issue. Commissioner Ulrich first, then Commissioner Guttel.
Yeah, Commissioner Geisler, our member Geisler, I guess, was accurate, very accurate in his presentation. I want to add some commentary, however. We were underwhelmed by the projects. We were disappointed, almost unanimously, maybe not quite. We were deadlocked on fund none versus fund some. I actually suggested, since we're deadlocked, maybe we'll compromise and fund one, and we followed that discussion, and that's what we have recommended. I regret making that recommendation that we compromise and fund one. Based on the conversation we've had for the last hour, we need every dollar to go back to fund things we've been talking about up to this point. We had a 1 through 5 scoring system. A 3 would be a C. Many of the scores scored all the projects 1, 2, 2.5. They did get up to an average of 3 and 3.1. That's a C. I recommended that we rebrand the category, unique and innovative projects. We were really looking for innovation. We didn't get that. And we also need a bigger scoring range, like 1 to 10. So it's too compact when you have 1 through 5. I mean, you know, if you said it's okay, well, that's a 2 or a 3, just okay. And so I'm strongly recommending that all the money other than TBI go back to the solicitation.
Thank you. Commissioner Guttel?
You know, I'll couch that too. I believe everybody was underwhelmed, and I agree with that comment. That was one of the comments I was going to say. But we also said, you know, perhaps too, it was our communications out to what we were, our expectations. And we did get, you know, a project that we hadn't done here, and that is unique to us to here. So I'm not saying it was a failure. I'm just saying that we wanted more and we didn't get more, but I think we can. And so, you know, we said we want people to keep coming into this, but we hope to give them more guidance, and we also hope to have a better criteria for putting the number and the point system together, because it wasn't quantitative, it was qualitative. And so even looking at how closely those two scored, it's a bit of a nebulous. It's about a starting point there. It's about going around a room or something like that. It's not really critical and technical, but it gave us a place to start conversation with, and so that's why we did it. So it was actually a worthwhile project to do. That said, I want to see this keep going, because I really think that there's an ability to get there. And and really find some unique projects in the future. I think it's up to us to try to get to the bottom of making sure we communicate better what our expectations are. And so on question 3, I could go with either A or B so that we move some of these projects forward. We put it out there and then we talk about it further when we go out for a solicitation in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner. Member Martinson and Commissioner Matas Castillo.
Thanks, Chair Hovland. So we were asked to keep ourselves at the level of policy about this, and so I want to make a couple of what I think are policy-related points. So the unique projects category is new this time around. The scoring process is, being built as the plane's being flown. All right, fine, well and good. But the foci, as I understand it from one of the workshops that I found online, is that the foci of the unique projects were that they be innovative, they focus on the environment, they focus on equity, and they focus on multimodalism. And I have to say that I think both the mobility hubs and the EV spot network projects both do all of those things. And to the argument that the EV spot is not innovative, I would point that the dictionary definition of innovative is not something brand new created, but it is make changes to something established, even if only in a pilot way, especially by introducing new methods, ideas, or products. And what I see the EV spot network is doing is a proof of concept that these kind of electric cars can be sustainable, particularly in low-income neighborhoods in the east side of St. Paul. We haven't proved that. And I think the Car2Go experiment is proof of that, they pulled out at the east side of St. Paul first because they couldn't be sustained based on their business model. So I think there's a proof of concept here of whether the electric vehicles can be sustained in a neighborhood where you have very low levels of car ownership and you have very few options for people to be getting around. And I think the success that we've seen with the initial is at risk if we don't continue to make investment. The other point I'd like to make is that remember, these are dollars that were carried over from the last time around. This is not a zero-sum game. We're not taking these dollars away from some other project. They were on the table sitting there. So we have them to spend. And again, back to my point earlier about fiscal responsibility, we should be using these dollars now for things that we've got.
Thank you, Member Martinson. Commissioner?
Well, I'll just second Member Martinson's comments. He hit most of my points I would like to make. I do think that as we move forward, because this is our first time doing unique projects, I think it's a really important category, and that we can learn as a group on how we adjust and tweak it. To Commissioner Gottel's point is that we can improve our messaging and clarity around what we do, but I don't think we should leave money on the table or go back to the drawing board, because we did put it out there. We had people apply and agencies apply with unique projects, especially projects that don't fit in other funding category and do help us get to our goals around climate, around equity. And so I would support option B here very strongly, and to encourage others to keep thinking about what might be unique projects moving forward as we hone in on what we want to get to. I think it is a risk for us, going back to Member Geisler's comments about, this isn't new, it's already out there, is that, how long is it have to be around before we say it's not new anymore? And I think there's a risk at us moving too quickly until we've actually built out a network of things and different organizations trying similar type technology, newly improved, as Member Martinson said. So I would highly, highly support option B, the funding of the EV spot, the mobility hub, and the TBI.
Thank you, Commissioner. Back to Member Geisler, then Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So putting my personal input on this one versus just reporting out what we did. My opinion, A or B would be fine. I was fine with 2. I'd be fine with 1. I think to Member Gottel's point, we should fund something here because it's the intent. Where I have heartburn around funding the EV spot is I do think that it is an extension of a new thing. And my question is, well, okay, if we've never done a road diet in this area, why can't we do a road diet as an innovative project? The intent of this category is to provide near-term seed money to do new things and to try new things not keep putting seed money into something we've proven out once via this money already.
But it's not called seed money.
Yeah, call it, if
It's
that's what
not-
it is, call it.
It was
that, but
never
that's not what it's
described as
called.
seed money.
I agree that it wasn't defined that it's not called seed money, it's called unique and innovative. So, my perception of this category was to fund those, which is why I lean more towards A, but I'm fine funding those. As far as hanging our hat on the scoring, I would not fund based on the empirical scores the scoring team provided. That was an input to have a discussion from. That's all that was. That is not the end-all be-all of how we decided what to fund and what not to fund. That I don't think that really even should play into our decision here. It's whether or not we think 1, 2, or no projects should be funded.
Thank you, Member Geisler. Member Foster, then Member Hollinshead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So like others have said, this is the first round of unique projects, and I think we've got some more guidance on how we should explain those to potential applicants. I agree with Commissioner Gattel that this is also an opportunity for like people on this committee, on this board, to get out there and get unique projects submitted, because the people that we can reach out to are the ones who are really going to have actually the unique and innovative ideas. I do want to speak in support of the EV project being included here under option B. I want to make sure I get the right one. I think that this project it's going to connect with the mobility hubs. It's going to have stations along the Gold Line. So I think the innovation here is the multimodality that is serving low-income people, especially people of color. I think the other part of this for me that is like what this means for unique and innovative is how could it be replicated in other parts of our area? Like I think about doing something like this in North Minneapolis. We're starting to do the small micro transit projects. How could we bring in car share there? So it's like, will this set an example for other people, for other agencies, for other regions to think about how they're doing public transit and just transit in general? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Foster. Then we're going to Member Jepson and then Member Stevens. What? Oh, Member Hollinshead and then Member Jepson, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's unique about this EV spot to me is a number of people at this meeting have spoken about how much time, the majority of time, citizens spend in their cars versus other modes. I want to talk about also the economics. What's unique about EV Spot is that it serves both. People can use a car and be in a car whenever they want or not and use alternative modes. And that is served by no other category that we consider at this table. Also, I want to say that I have an electric vehicle. I charge in the garage, so I don't use public chargers too much. But for those who live in multi-unit buildings, for those of low income, charging is a real challenge and a big challenge, and one of the things that sets the EV Spot program apart is that there is host service and host maintenance. If you drive outstate with an electric vehicle, you will find chargers that have absolutely no responsibility from the host properties for maintenance or service. If you get in a handshake problem, or you get in some other problem, your credit card doesn't register with the local power provider or something, you have no support on site. That is different with EV Spot. I have gone out and tested the EV Spot chargers. They all work without a problem with handshake, without a problem with maintenance, and there is service available. So that is unique to me. And the bottom line then is, yes, this is a supplement to a previous amount of funding that we provided, but we offer greater range to more communities that are in need of equity, and that is a unique supplement. So thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Member
Chair.
Hollinshead. Member Jepson and Member Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was on the committee for just making these decisions, and I am in full support of option 2 in addition to all of the, option B, in addition to all of the other reasons that people were discussing. I did mention during the discussion process, that we should not penalize others, applicants, for our learning experience, for our learning process. So, because I caution people against choosing A or C, because if we move the goalposts, that is gonna be a terrible reputation on this committee and this board. They did what we asked them to do as a grant writer. You fill in the blanks, you do what you're asked to do, and then the deciders change it midstream. It's like, how is anybody supposed to win? And what does that look like on us? And what is the next application that these projects are gonna apply for through this committee? It's not possible. So, please choose option B and support both of these projects, and we'll take it as a learning lesson and move on from there.
All right, thanks, Member Jepson. And then Member Stevens, and then Commissioner Karwoski.
I also served on that committee. Member Geisler, thank you. I think you did a great job summarizing it. I always hold value in committees that do work and bring it back, having been on the receiving end of always being part of bigger committees and then charging somebody to do work and having them come back and then rediscuss the whole thing and changing it. So I very much value that. Not that it can't ever be changed, but this committee worked really hard. Just for transparency, I voted for funding none of them. I, much like, Member Gotel, I mean, some of the members were just underwhelmed and didn't feel they met the requirements of this category. But when we split 6-6, you got to get your work done as a committee. We had a recommendation, and then we decided we should talk through the projects themselves to see if they did or didn't meet any of these categories that we had divided, no matter how we scored them. So we looked at the innovation, the equity, the environment, the partnerships. I don't remember all of them, and I can't remember all my notes, but that's what distinguished the two. So we're not, part of the message for those us that voted for 0 was, we don't want to set the bar so low that, the projects that come in. So we really then had some really good, deep discussion on, are these projects distinguishable, and if so, how? And if not, then we're gonna go back to the drawing board and come back with no recommendation. And I think the discussion really did show the distinction in the projects. And both projects were good, but I think in the EV, it was an extension of something. I actually scored it's only in the pilot program, not as a positive, but a negative, because I wanted to see more of what these results could be before we put more money behind it, because we kind of funded it even though we didn't have a category. If you remember the discussion, it was a unique project when it started, and we worked it in there and got it because we thought it was a good thing. But I think Excel's not a partner anymore. There were just a lot of factors that distinguished it as not really falling in this category this time around. And the mobility hubs, even though I wasn't, I'm supporting the recommendation of the committee, even though I voted to fund none because of the good work that we did to get to the point that we got to. And I do think the projects are distinguishable. And we worked hard to get to the end result, so I'm going to continue to support the recommendation of the committee.
All right, thanks for that supplemental summary. It was very helpful. Then on to Commissioner Karwoski, then Member Dugan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be consistent, like the comment about we had a rule, let's support that. So we had an expectation for scoring. I agree with the comments. I was part of the scoring committee and I left before the final input. I'd rather support the 2 projects than the 1. So I'd like to see the vote eventually for the 2 projects, and if that doesn't fail, I'd rather vote for 0. Because I do agree but the expectation is that, I think the expectation was there was this $4 million or so and that we would get good projects and that we would fund that. So in good faith, you had 2 projects that scored essentially the same.
So remember, Commissioner, you're thinking of B is what you're saying,
B,
2 projects, because we're going to support the TBI. That actually makes 3.
Well,
You're favoring B.
Right, B, I stand corrected. There would still be basically $750,000 that could be put towards other projects. So that's appealing. I think it's the EV spot network, it's talked about along the goal line. Washington County doesn't have an electrification policy yet, so these won't be going into Washington County, but when we do, I think that's something our staff's gonna present. That will be a leverage to extend some of that opportunity into our county in some needed areas. Landfall, other areas that I represent are very modestly incomed. Now, there was good comments, so I support the two projects. There was an expectation and be consistent, but if that wasn't a fail, I'd rather do 0. Moving forward, this gets into like moving forward, we could, for the next solicitation, I love the point about the 10-point scale, also setting expectations for innovation. But for now, I favor B, and I'll leave it at that.
Commissioner, I have one clarification. Didn't we talk in the committee about, it had some gold line implications on the St. Paul end?
Yes.
I mean, you don't have yours put together in Washington County yet, but doesn't it have some implications on the St. Paul end?
Right, and I had to make that clear to some of those people organizing things. I'm only one vote on that Washington County board. We don't have a policy. We're probably gonna be looking at that. But regardless, again, you had two projects that scored. The expectation is they would meet the criteria, and they would get funded if they're in that 3-point range, and I want to abide by that. I don't support the 1. I'd rather go 0, but.
All right, thank you. Member Dugan, would you yield to
Yes.
Member Jalali, who has a commitment that she has to go to, and she had one final comment?
Of course, Councilmember Jalal,
I'm
we've
so
seen you
thankful,
pack
and
your bags.
It's
so-
actually like the voting meeting down the street, so it's not like I have to go and like do my job somewhere else. But I want to thank the points that are getting raised because I really appreciate people's willingness to lift up the principles that I think are important in addition to the project, which is just transparency, consistency, accountability, not blaming community applicants for parameters. The points that are raised in the scoring committee about just wanting to see more, different, better, I think that's fair game. And also it has to come within the context of, this was a clearly defined option for this type of project. I don't know that we're hearing that there was consensus on that. And I would also just, in the interest of getting something done and learning from it, be extremely grateful if we could support B, and I'm hearing more support for B, so I'm really thankful for that. I think the piece that I want to spell out for folks too, in terms of who is it helping, how is it unique, is I do think that this is funding that specifically goes to an expansion in one of St. Paul's neighborhoods that feels actually a lot more like Maplewood and greater, kind of inner ring suburb communities than the part of the community that I represent. I represent kind of like the epicenter of transit density, tons of new development in the last 10 years. And when I go to the east side in this part of the community, it's actually like being in another city. And I don't say that in any other way than to neutrally describe it. Like it's very much needs this investment to actually help people get to where they're going. And it's also one of the fastest growing communities in the census. It is disproportionately actually Southeast Asian and Asian community and immigrant folks and our indigenous community in St. Paul. So it is serving a low-income community of color. And I just don't know where else in the state of Minnesota you can say, here's a community car share program that's accessible and affordable to these residents in a neighborhood like this. It's not just unique, it doesn't actually exist anywhere else. And I think that all those things paint a picture of, let's help get this funded and then learn from it. And that way EV is better positioned to apply for things that are more fair to them, and we are more positioned to fund things that we think are a better use of our funding. So I'm sorry to say my speech and run. I have to go now. They're playing me off the stage at the Oscars. Thank you, everybody, for all of your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Bye.
Back to Member Dugan, then Member Koski, then Member Lewis. Then I think we can do some polling.
Yeah, and thank you, Member Jalali, for speaking. Appreciate it. I'm going to upset the apple cart a little bit. I was the tiebreaker. I voted with Commissioner Ulrich when he said, let's have some kind of a compromise because we weren't getting anywhere. So my initial vote had always been they were lukewarm projects. We're awarding mediocrity. That's not what this was intended. So if I change my vote, it'd be 4-8. 8 against funding. And then if Mr. Karwoski, Commissioner Karwoski joins in, it'd be 5-8. I do, despite saying that, I do see there's merit in the mobility hubs. I've been looking on the internet for different cities that have it, and Denver particularly has a robust program, and it describes it pretty well, and it's impressive what they've done. And the other reason is it because it's asked for by Metro Transit, which is certainly under the Met Council and as one of their primary responsibilities. In terms of going forward, we're blessed to have at the University of Minnesota the Center for Transportation Studies, and I think perhaps they would be willing to confer with us on what's innovative, what are people doing around the world, and not just in the United States. What is really innovative? And it's interesting, though, if we go with the electric vehicles, we'll increase congestion, vehicle miles traveled, there'll be more cars, which kind of goes in the opposite direction of one of the things we talked about. And what I would recommend, what I would like to do, is any money left over goes into the future, not to every other project, but goes into the future. And we, just like in a home budget, if it's $10 and you get it for $8, you put the $2, you don't throw out the window, you put the $2 back in your wallet and use it for the next time. So that's what I'd recommend. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Member Dugan. Member Koski, then Member Lewis, and then let's do some polling.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just piling on my support for option B here. So we're back to the, I think Member Martinson brought up some great points of just the merits with equity, innovation, and climate, but I also hear Commissioner Gattell here. It just seems to me that, and I hear it kind of over and over that people were underwhelmed. I was not part of this committee. It sounds like it would have been a very exciting committee to be part of, I will say.
Next time.
Yeah, but I will say that.
Sounds are deceiving.
But it just, we got people were underwhelmed by these projects, so I guess I task us as making sure that we're educating and getting the word out there of what types of projects we're looking for, and how do we define innovative? How do we define those that are pushing us towards supporting climate change and equity? So I think that I would just task us with that, is making sure that we're doing a better job with educating that. So.
All right, thanks, Member Koski. And then Member Lewis, I'm going to give you the last word here before we. And thanks everybody for sticking around. This was really an incredible conversation and a really important conversation, and so valuable to the work that we have to do. Member Lewis.
It's a lot of pressure being the last one, but I'll also put a word in for 3B and a few comments on that. A number of folks have mentioned that this is our first go at unique projects, and as such, we're refining the scoring criteria. Maybe we can improve upon that in the future, but should we punish people in this go around? If this was our first attempt at it, doesn't feel like that's the right thing to do. 2, it feels like there's a connection between mobility hubs and EV spot networks as well. You can see there being some overlap between those, in which part of your mobility hub may be part of an EV spot network. That seems like something that we want to explore and would be damaged by separating the two. And then maybe in a nod to Member Dugan's comment about what to do with remaining money, I'm not sure if this is doable within our framework, but another option that I thought of too in our discussion earlier about safe routes to school is the remaining 727 funds are remaining safe route to school that wasn't funded before. Maybe crossing lines, crossing funding sources, so fully understand if that's not a doable thing, but figured I'd make note of that since the money wraps up.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Chair, can the unique projects category was created to fund our car. That was from the last solicitation. So it's not our first, but you remember we were wondering what to do with it. And that's when we came up with the set aside and the $4 million to fund our cars. So, they already had a significant bite of the apple.
All right, Member Barber wants the last word.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Shocking, I know, but I will keep it very short. I just want to make a final point, I was on the committee that looked at these aren't bad projects, they aren't bad applications. I want to make sure that that's
Right.
very clear. It was that we set out this category with expectations of reaching probably a pretty high innovation threshold. So, these are good projects that we're looking at, and I want to make sure that is well known when we're talking about this money. So,
Yeah, that's a good point, fair point. Steve, is there anything you want to add as you listen to the conversation before we start polling, or you just want to, I think we know the answer to question one, but we'll ask it anyway. And then Chair Solberg.
Yeah.
The TAC recommendation was follow the rule, follow the BRT rule. And then you had suggested that the excess funds go to bike ped or modernization. I just thought maybe it might help folks after we get past that first question of the BRT rule, do we want to maintain it or not, to know what the TAC was thinking when they made that recommendation. So if you want to come up and tell us that would be helpful.
Yeah, Chair, I can certainly do that as soon as you go through the first poll here with one, and then go into what some of the TAC discussion was. Not that this wasn't a great fruitful conversation here, but if you're interested in what the technical committee said, I can expound on that.
All right, stand by. Okay, here's question one. For the base funding options, should staff continue to follow the BRT rule?
Yes.
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 Yeah, show of hands. Not voting, just polling.
Yep. Okay.
All right, good, all right.
Seeing that?
Bear with me a second here. Now, Chair Solberg, you want to come up? Because the next issue is, how does the TAB want to repurpose the remaining transit and TDM modal funds? That's $4 million in the midpoint scenario, $3 million in the bike ped heavy scenario. And Chair Solberg.
So, Mr. Chair, I think just again, it's a lot of reiteration of what was discussed here, but once that was discussed at TAC, the question kind of funneled around a couple of the larger items that are going around right now. One, there's been a lot of discussion on safety in the past year, especially, and Member Barnes has been giving updates to TAB. Two, we knew that has been a substantial increase in our most vulnerable users, so bike ped users. And so there was a general discussion that those should be the areas that we invest in. There was discussion about bike ped, and then there were other options that were discussed about more the spot mobility or the roadway discussion like we had here, modernization, because those do also bring bike ped safety components to them. And so that was really the biggest part of where tax recommendations came, because it was thinking about those larger policy issues. From a technical perspective, is there anything that's better than the other? We don't have performance measures that would lead us to one scenario or another. It's really policy issues. And so that is kind of why the recommendation came forward as it did.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Chair Solberg? Member Stevens?
Mr. Chair, I'm just a little confused. Are we going to poll on the base funding option?
No.
No, not today.
No, not today. We're just going to
Okay.
poll next on how you want to allocate those funds
Okay. Well,
between,
for
because the
some of
options
us-
are,
For some of us, depending on whether we're using the midpoint or the ped heavy, that
yeah, that's a
that
good
really
point.
is going to
Fair point.
influence my position on some of these other allocations. So that's why I asked, sorry. I
No,
didn't
but
mean to
that's
be out of
okay.
order.
That's a good question. Steve, what's your preference here? To make,
Yeah, we're on the question about the TDM, and I didn't hear much interest in that $1 million on the last two TDM, but, another kind of option on this next slide.
is that a fair conclusion on Steve's part? But there wasn't much interest in allocating $1 million to those two TDM projects? Yeah, okay.
Either way, I think we vote on these options here on how to reallocate it, or we hold back that 4 and 3 million until next time. Because what I'm hearing is if people go bike ped heavy, maybe they want that extra money to go to roadways. If we go midpoint, then people want to shift that little increment of money back to bike ped. That's kind of what I've heard a few times here.
I think that's where Member Stevens was going.
Yep.
And I think a lot of other people in their
So we
minds.
could
as well.
just hold back that money and then see where the conversation next month goes, and then
Okay.
it might flip it one way or the other.
Okay, that's good. Is that people comfortable with that, holding it back and then discuss it in the context of those various? Member Hollinshead, did you have a?
So not much interest in TDM. You're referring to funding projects 6 and 7. That would have been what happened in TDM if there were more interest, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Well, actually, I was very interested in that. I didn't express it enough apparently at the scoring committee. So, anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
So do you want to, what about the TDM transit funding category then? How do you want to handle that one?
Talking about slide 12 or 11?
Yeah, I'm on slide 12.
I think in that
Hold on,
case.
Commissioner Modis Castillo has a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a clarifying question to your suggestion about holding back. Is there a timeline or a deadline that funds need to be spent if we go that option?
Well, you'll
Are
have-
we putting ourselves into any
Well, you mean
risk?
holding the money over?
Right, what he
Yeah,
just
no, we're just
said.
talking about holding it over and open until next month.
Next month, yeah.
So there's no, but does it change, when's the deadline that unique project money needs to be spent, or this funding needs to be spent? Does it cause any issues, even though it's only a month to us, is it a different?
no,
I mean,
no,
I know,
no.
not you, this.
Yeah, we're
funding.
talking
Yeah,
few
it
years
doesn't-
out, so.
Most of the money's in 26 and 27,
Got it,
so,
okay.
yep, we got,
Just wanted-
it's not
We
a.
called it
We should have
2022.
we should have clarified holding over the decision, not holding the money.
Yeah, that's right.
We're gonna hold on to it, yes.
Yeah, it says 2022, but we're really talking a few years out, so 2027. Okay, so slide 13.
I think we're on unique projects, and we had, I think we just need to get to a vote on which one you
So
want to
what
do.
unique projects should be funded? It seemed like we were trending towards B, option B.
Well, you still have to listen to what the recommendation of the committee was. I mean, you can't forget that. We put the time in, and I think that was.
I wonder if we should decide funding versus not funding, and then if you say funding, 1 versus 2. So it would, if you
A
say
versus
not
B.
fund, that answers a question. If you say funding, then you gotta divide that down. See what I'm saying?
Well, we have to fund a TBI.
Well, that's a given.
Yeah, but I mean, that's within the unique projects funding category, so we have to kind of modify your question a little bit, which is a fair question. So is that C, John? I mean, is that funding only
Well, I think the group needs to make a decision between A and B is one of the, somebody's gonna be in either A or B, or somebody's gonna be in C. If C fails, then you gotta take 2 more votes.
I guess
on A or
we
B.
can ask it sequentially and still deal with the TBI. So the threshold question that John raises, and the one that's embodied in 3A is, I think, should unique projects be funded at the level?
Mr. Chair, if I may ask, since we're not making a decision here, can we just see how many people are for A, how many people are for B, and how many people are for C?
We could do that.
And then that will give us an idea of who just wants to do what, so just vote for the option you want. And if you're fine with all 3 of them, raise your hand 3 times, because that's okay.
Yeah.
It just tells us who's leaning in.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of them doing all the work in the gap.
Well, I know, but I think we're confusing it because now we're ignoring the committee recommendation if we start voting with nothing, now
Sure.
we're kind of starting over, so I like that approach.
All right, Cole has a point he wants to make. He led the unique
Yes,
projects
yeah.
conversation along with Steve, so.
Conversation you guys were just having, so thank you. I really like Commissioner Aller's suggestion. I think you should say, how many people support option C? If it's less than half, then make those people choose between A and B. That way, we only really are deciding on 2 choices. If we have 3, and a third of the committee votes for all 3, then that's not helpful to us. It doesn't give us much direction. So I think that's where you were headed. Vote on C
Yeah.
first, and if it's less than half, then everyone vote on either A or B.
Well, I think he actually had a threshold question, and that is, do people feel comfortable funding the unique projects category?
Which is,
Which is C.
Well, no, it's not.
No, it's not C, it's different.
It's not C. C is a separate question. That's the next question.
Okay.
C has to be funded, right?
do you want to fund the unique project category? Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, sure, we can ask it.
Well, that is the question of C.
No.
It's not.
Fund
Fund
only
only
TBI.
TBI.
No, the next question is, do you want to fund TBI within the unique projects category?
Yeah,
Thought we have to.
I thought we'd already
We have
decided.
an obligation to do that, right?
I think everybody agrees we're funding
I
TBI.
think everyone agrees
I don't
we're
think there's any
funding
Funding the
discussion.
TBI, all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
TBI
right,
is
so
a-
now we can go to Member Geisler's.
Now, we'll do
Do it the Coles way?
Do Coles
C.
way.
Yep,
Yeah.
C, yes or no.
Ask, you want yeses?
See,
Yes.
C is defeated, then, like, I
Oh,
will vote on.
well, I thought we
either
already
A or B.
voted on C. I thought we'd all decided C was okay.
No.
No.
No, we didn't vote.
All right, let's poll on C then. Who wants to fund only the TBI, leaving 3.767 million in the account?
You're just doing a raise of hands or a?
Yes, raise hands.
Okay. All right. Who wants to fund the TBI and the Mobility Hubs project, leaving, spending 2.33 million and leaving 2.167 million in the account?
Well, since the other one's gonna fail.
You can-
Yeah, you can vote, well, if,
You can vote as many times as you
right,
want.
because
defeated, right?
assuming
Yes,
we
it
looked
was
at first vote, that failed, right?
Yeah.
So now those of us that didn't want to fund anything are left with either A or B.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
so I'll pick A.
This is A?
This is A.
This is A.
The question on the table? What is the question?
A.
A.
Who's in favor of A?
For A, okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then, got that, count?
Yep.
Okay, how about B? Who's in favor of B?
That's it.
Okay, so
Okay.
that's pretty clear. Yeah.
There you go.
That's B.
See,
Yeah,
now, I
good
would
process.
have wanted D first, because if it would have failed, then I would have went to C, so, you know. It kind of eliminated my.
Anybody else have
ability
any
to
other
go for
polling
C, you
questions
know.
they want to ask?
I don't think anybody had
Yeah.
that.
I have
Martinson?
I have a request that the entire tab get to see the report out from the subcommittee that was making these recommendations. Is that available to us, and can we
I
see that
believe
well in it?
It's all public information.
But can we see it in advance of the next month's meeting?
I don't know if there was a report.
Yeah, it's in the, of the unique projects.
Yeah,
It's in the attachments. It's in the packet.
that's the full report?
Yes, yep.
I see.
Are we adjourned?
Okay, everybody, thanks.
Seconded.
Okay.
Is